Good morning and good evening, depending on where you are joining us in the world today. Just want to welcome you to our Human Trafficking International Symposium. My name is Dr. Santosh Paulus. I'm a family medicine physician and I work at Northwell Health. I'm a hospitalist and I'm also the Senior Program Director for the Human Trafficking Heart Program. What is the HEART program? The HEART program stands for Human Trafficking Education, Advocacy, Response, and Training. And we're just so excited to host this, our first annual international symposium. You know, we're talking about getting the conversation started. So where did this conversation start? You know, a year ago at around this time, the world was a different place. I actually was having a conversation with some of my colleagues in Chennai, with Dr. PM Nair, with Dr. Deva Sitham, Dr. Selva Kumar, and we were talking about having this international symposium. Something happened in between. We all are aware of a global pandemic kind of derailed and changed our plans, but we pressed on and we moved on and we kept the conversation going. And that's what you're seeing right now is this virtual symposium. For some of you, this is the first day of the two-day symposium, and others, this is the day 4, as we've had 3 days of training through the United Nations and the Global Strategic Operatives. And so we are just excited to continue to learn from each other and to keep this conversation going. You know, human trafficking is a fundamental violation of human rights. It's a local problem everywhere. It's a global problem. And so we want to be able to address this and actually have an impact at the global level. And that's what Northwell is trying to do. And that's why we're partnering with all these different organizations to get this done. You know, I talked about this conversation. So a couple of years ago, I was having a conversation with Dr. Kalyani Gopal at the SAFE conference in Chicago. And that was where I learned a lot about what was going on with trafficking on the international stage. And through those conversations with Dr. Kalyani, I was able to meet Dr. PM Nair, and we were able to just start some projects. And this is where we were able to learn from each other. Dr. Nair came over to New York and hosted our symposium here. We learned from him and inspired each other, challenged each other. And that's what we want to see happen when we have these types of conversations and these types of conferences. Knowledge is great, awareness is good, and it's important. I don't want to diminish that, but it can't stop there. We need to go forward and we need to act on this knowledge. And, you know, I'm reminded of a story of you know, how lions hunt, right? They go and they kind of pick apart up their prey, an animal that's kind of not in the pack, right? And that reminds me of the vulnerability of those who are being trafficked. In simplest terms, human trafficking is the exploitation of people for profit. And people's vulnerabilities are targeted and they are able to be exploited for those reasons. And in the same way, we have to address this issue together. We can't try to do this all by ourselves. And so we acknowledge that, you know, in healthcare, we're one piece of the puzzle. We need to have our legislators, we need to have, you know, the judicial system, we need to have law enforcement, we need to have the community-based organizations that are working with victims and survivors of trafficking. We need to work together. And that is what we're trying to accomplish right now, is to work together. You know, a year ago, we had a training here at LIJ, and through that process, we had Kraus attend. Julia Bracco was a part of that. And this is another way where we continue to inspire each other. You know, I initially learned from Dr. Chambers some things that they were doing as a medical safe haven out in Dignity Health. And Northwell was able to use that as a model to inspire us to actually bring in some of those same models and concepts and have it implemented here. And in the same way, Kraus Health System has done that, one of our affiliates here at Northwell. We're just so excited to have this conversation right now and to learn from each other. And I want to just encourage everybody to just learn from each other. There's going to be so many things that we're going to discuss and learn about, different perspectives, some from the United States, some from India. We may not agree on everything, but it's good to learn and to be able to inspire each other, to challenge each other, and continue this conversation so that way we can have allies and resources once this conference is over. And we're just excited to have you here, and I'm looking forward to all the great things that are going to be coming from this. We're going to be hearing a few words from our CEO, Michael Dowling, coming up. So stay tuned.
I'd like to begin by thanking all of you who are participating in this extraordinarily important conference. I want to especially thank all of the organizations, the host organizations, and all of you that are making this a reality. I also want to say a special thanks to Dr. Santosh Paulus from Northwell Health, who has been leading a major effort across Northwell on this issue for many years. He's been doing extraordinary work, wonderfully committed, compassionate individual that believes strongly on the importance of this issue that we have to be continually working on. So I want to say thank you, Santosh, for everything that you do. So let me state the obvious. Obviously, everybody knows this, and this is why you're participating in this. But this is a global issue. This affects pretty much all countries, including the United States. It's also, as you know, a major business. It's a $150 to $200 billion business. And of course, it is facilitated increasingly now by the online digital world that we live in. And more important also now because of COVID. The human toll is extraordinary. The health issues on individuals and families. Now, for all of you that are participating and are working in an unbelievably important way to deal with this, my congratulations. We can and we will make progress. It'll take time. It's not a short-term issue, it's a long-term issue. We'll have to be resilient, consistent. We will have to persevere. But we have to be optimistic. Despite the difficulty, we have to be optimistic that we can make headway, as I know many of you are doing right now. We can make headway to deal with this issue, deal with the human factor, the business aspects of it, so we can get to a place where we know that our children and our individuals that we care so much about are safe and protected. So I thank you all for participating. Thank you for everything that you do. And all my best for a wonderful, wonderful conference. Thank you so much.
Dr. Kalyani Gopal is a clinical psychologist and the president and founder of Safe Coalition for Human Rights, a nonprofit that aims to protect the human dignity of trafficked persons. Dr. Gopal is also a keynote and international speaker and trainer on foster care and adoption, sex trafficking, human trafficking, child sexual abuse, autism, and neurodevelopmental disorders and psychopathology. She has coined the term displacement trauma to describe the complex trauma caused by frequent disruptions of attachment bonds. She's also the best-selling author of The Supportive Foster Parent, Foster Parenting Step by Step, The Grief and Loss Workbook in My Heart, and Workbook on Child Sexual Abuse, and co-editor of the upcoming Springer publication, Sex Trafficking, Feminist and Transnational Perspectives. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Kalyani Gopal.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Kalyani Gopal. I'm a clinical psychologist. I practice in Indiana, in the USA. I also was trained in India at the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences in Bangalore, India. So I'm very bicultural, bicoastal, say, put it, a universal global citizen here. I'm the president of Safe Coalition for Human Rights, which is an organization focused on combating human trafficking. And I'm also the president-elect for the Society of Clinical Psychology for the American Psychological Association. And I have about 3 or 4 clinics here in Munster, Indiana, and in Illinois as well. And I also practice in Florida from time to time. And I do international consultation on cases regarding psychological trauma, the trauma bonding of sex trafficking victims, and the training of experts on human trafficking on the IAC program, which I will share with you briefly as we go along. So we began in November of 2013. We had a group of survivors that got together, and we had two co-chairs, myself and another psychologist, at the Illinois Psychological Association annual convention in Chicago. And we had only 3 panelists, including myself. I was the chair. But the ladies who had come in were trafficked victims, or sexually trafficked victims, and they had gotten dressed up, and they were really excited about this conference. And there were only 6 or 7 people in the room, 6 or 7 psychologists. In the other room, we had over 75 psychologists, mainly because they were dealing with HIPAA, which is our rights for our clients, so to speak. And they were devastated. So what we did is we took them to another room. We said, hey, today not many people heard you, but come next year, the whole world is going to hear you. So they were very, very enthusiastic. And when you keep a promise to survivors, you've got to keep it. No matter who you keep a promise to, right? We have to keep our promises. So of course, there I am, trapezing in Chicago, trying to find a fiscal sponsor. Failed miserably. And by late 2014, we realized we have to have a fiscal sponsor. So what we did is we formed our own 501c3, which is in the US called a nonprofit charity organization. It's a tax-exempt organization. These are called 501c3s in the US. And once we formed that, by October, we were a 501c3. And by December, we got the IRS letter so that we could be fiscal sponsors for ourselves. So fast forward, we had that convention. It was hugely successful. We went from the us versus them concept to all of us working together. In other words, this isn't about me as an expert, so-called expert, and the lived experience folks as not being experts. It's actually totally a false dichotomy. So what we did is we said, we're all in this together, right? Just like the COVID-19, we're all in this together. And moving forward, we then came up with a mission statement, which is to protect the human dignity of trafficking persons globally through education, prevention, and rehabilitation. And this is very, very critical because these 3 prongs of education, prevention, rehabilitation are all interconnected in every aspect of the work we do. Our other goal is also to uplift individuals from poverty, because one of the psychosocial determinants of human trafficking is the huge dichotomy between the wealth and the poor, the wealthy and the poor, the established and the migrants, the immigrants and the colonial established folks. So we're looking at improving the psychosocial determinants, including poverty, migration, bullying, lack of food insecurities, housing insecurities, and so forth. And that has become the crux of our program that we now call Thrive, and I'll go into that as we move along. And in terms of enhancing global collaboratives, it has been a beautiful experience hosting the SAFE conferences. We have one coming up in 2021, which is a SAFE 2021 conference. Each of these conferences, and we've hosted 4 of them, have gone from including 10 countries and broadcasting to 10 countries in the remotest parts of the world to now having 73 countries as part of our group that we are able to relate to. We are invited for meetings, invited to speak to, and so forth for training. So it's a very, very exciting aspect of it. I think some of these individuals who are going to participate in this conference met actually through our conferences in 2018 and 2016. And some of them are now a part and parcel of this whole movement in the anti-trafficking, because they've been able to connect and fill in areas of gaps within each of their fields. So it's very, very exciting, the collaborative that we formed. And moving right along, our focus is the 4 Ps, and I won't go into it because most of you who are going to attend this conference know what the 4 Ps are. Our focus is on prevention, protection, and partnership, and we leave prosecution to law enforcement. So as I was sharing with you, our conferences have been on 2014, We've also had others in 2016, 18, 2019. And in September 17th, we actually have a one-day in-person invitation-only meeting, and it's going to have invited speakers to speak at it. It's a 3-day conference. The other 3 days, we invite proposals. The theme is Rise and Thrive. The idea being is that we all are talking about awareness, but it's not enough to discuss awareness. We need to know, what do we do with this awareness? Great, be aware there's human trafficking. Who doesn't know it exists? But there's a second component. Once you know what human trafficking is, once you're aware that this exists, what do you do with that knowledge? And that's the second and third and fourth step that we're actually going toward. And we're also going to be discussing our program on Thrive, and we're also going to be discussing standards for safe houses and what they need to meet from a psychosocial and cultural standpoint. So these are some of what we do. We've had a few publications. One of the publications, which is a handbook of sex trafficking. I don't mean to be doing any marketing. I'm just sharing with you that this is the book, and easily accessible. There's several authors. I'm one of the co-editors of the book, along with Lenore Walker, who many of you know. Dr. Lenore Walker is the one who came up with the cycles of domestic violence, the cycles of violence theory. We also have chapters in the United Nations book on the global health by 2030 and beyond. And our chapter, my chapter, is on reducing human trafficking around the globe by 2030 and beyond. We have other books that have published: In My Heart, 2016, the Workbook on Sexual Abuse, 2014, Foster Parenting, so that we can protect the children from being removed from foster parents and going from not only with one placement. The average child has about 9 different placements, which is deeply, deeply egregious. We are trying to combat that. This is a graphic I had developed when I was writing the chapter on the book, and even when I was working on, I think, the International Conference for Psychologists. I did a presentation a few months ago. And we're looking at demand, supply chains, lack of fear prosecution, power differential. These are the psychosocial determinants underlying the human trafficking and the success of human trafficking. The lack of education, lack of access to jobs, the invisibility of the victims. Victims do not say they're victims. They rarely, if ever, speak of themselves as being victims. If anything, they don't even know they're trafficked. And just in the month of August of last year, I was talking with a colleague of mine, and last year in August, identified 15 victims of human trafficking in routine clinical assessment. So I'm actually doing a chapter on routine clinical assessment for the National Register of Psychologists, and we're going to be publishing that shortly as well. The idea is that unless clinicians are trained in the art of identifying victims of trafficking, they are not going to give you that information and say, hey, by the way, I'm a victim of human trafficking. It just doesn't happen. You know, you hear about child sexual abuse. They'll tell you they were sexually abused as children, but they will not tell you they were victims of human trafficking. So the general concept, the socialization of boys as being boys, you know, you can have affairs, you can do whatever you want. You're a boy, you can do what you want. Women, on the other hand, cannot. Women are called a whole host of names when they go outside their marriage. Men are not necessarily, it's not the same story with them usually. Race, skin color, health, appearance, you know, being blacker versus lighter skin, that's a huge issue right there. Lack of access to laws that actually are strong enough. We usually have very weak laws. And what happens is that because the weak laws, they're not implemented. Or we could have very strong laws. However, because of the maintenance demand, maintenance factors, which are corruption, financial advantages, and other forms of gains, these laws are not necessarily implemented and people turn a blind eye. So it's not necessarily true that we don't have laws. It's mostly that these laws are not properly implemented. So with those of labor trafficking, there's a fear of loss of livelihood, a fear of deportation. Our IAC program, we've had 10 internationally accredited modules, 40 hours of training. You can reach out to us for more information. Email us as admin@safechr.org. This is the first psychologically accredited, this is the first psychologically accredited program on human trafficking. These are our trainees. You can see Dr. Nair there, who's actually trained me as much as I've trained him. I think if not more, he's trained me. Dr. Mazumdar, Honorable Zoe, who is a victim of human trafficking and a former Minister of Social Development, Labor and Gender. We have several other people here, and Assistant Nikiji, who worked on Italy, from Nigeria to Italy trafficking, Sierra Leone, and we have several people. Some of the faces you might recognize here: Cindy McCain, Honorable Cindy McCain, who's very active in the field of fighting human trafficking. Deb Roskowski, a dear friend, and she heads the UN Task Force on Human Trafficking, and I was part of that task force 2 years ago. We have a Safe Schools pilot program, and it's an online e-learning program for social-emotional resiliency, teaching people leadership abilities, prevention of human trafficking by increasing the building blocks for children and students in high school and middle school, as well as elementary school. And then we have the Thrive program, which is a pilot development for the Future Safe Village. We actually have women 18 and up. We can house 4 to 6 survivors at a time. It's been a very fascinating project, and I could just spend another couple of hours just talking about it. We provide wraparound services with that. And then the future is the Safe Village, which I'll go to real briefly. And we have a 5-acre land that we're looking at, developing a village for 100 children in a safe, restorative environment. And finding volunteers are one of the struggles always we have, and the monetary funding, donations, and a support base. My name is Dr. Kalyani Gopal. I'm a clinical psychologist practicing in Indiana and Illinois, and also in Florida. I am honored to be here. I appreciate your time and your energy listening to this presentation. And I appreciate your time. I'm also the president-elect of the Division 12, which is a Society of Clinical Psychology for the American Psychological Association. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your time.
Namaste all. I will be speaking about missing children in the context of human trafficking. I think very many cases where the child is to be trafficked gets reported to the police as missing children. Parents might be thinking the child has gone missing, or they might suspect that he or she would have gone on their own. But for us, what is sure is the missing child. And I think the most important aspect of dealing with that from the side of police is prioritization by the police leaders, as well as sensitization of the officers who are immediately dealing with that. I would emphasize this point because I think across the world, wherever they are, police is having a lot of responsibilities, and unless the leaders are very clear as to this is a very, very high priority area, things may not work. And again, when we speak about the sensitivity, I often think that there is absolutely no doubt in the mind of anybody that the most important possession for a mother or a father is their children. But when a car is missing, or when some ornaments are missing, or some physical possessions are missing, there may be a response. But when the child is missing, somehow that response may not be there to the extent something else is missing. I think this is only because this crucial issue has not been projected to that extent. And as a corollary to this, I would say that I'm yet to see anybody more aggrieved than the parent of a missing child. Even parents whose children have been killed, even those situations where they are brutally killed, at least they have the solace that maybe the child has gone to God or something. They have a closure. But in this case, there is absolutely no closure. So when we think about a proper response as to the missing cases, I think we would require basically 4 things. Number one, we should have a plan. And I would say the most important thing is the definition of when we start responding. Often I have seen that when the parents come and report the case, say 1 hour after the school time, and then there may be a thought that the child might come back after 1 hour, 2 hours. So I was thinking about it at length, and my solution is that we have to decide the time to respond as the time decided by the parents. The moment parents feel that something is wrong, that is the time where we have to put the efforts into moving. And when we are starting, unless we have a team ready, I would say the first is the plan and the second would be the team. And when we speak about the team, I would say your own men are very important in that, but we should always think about other possibilities, like especially the public and those segments, for example, transportation, the railway authorities, who are there with more possibility of helping you. If you are able to identify them and configure them in such a way that in a contingency you can respond to them. For example, when I was working in Nagaland, in Northeast, what we did, we selected the village elders and we had kept ready around 2,500 numbers of the public, including these elders, then the transport authorities, then your own field formations, everybody's phone number, and then the sister agencies who are ready to collaborate. If you can pre-identify these numbers, and then there is a method of communicating with them. We were using one mass SMS platform. And in the SMS, we will be writing that this child is missing, and the details are there in the Facebook, our unit Facebook page. It will be having more details, and it will also have, if the child is found, those details will be published there. So in this way, we found that in no time, the entire public, the sister agencies, your own formations, everybody are up and ready looking for the child in the immediate golden hour, I would say. So if you have this team ready, especially including the public, it is going to be a great help. And when it comes to planning, I told you perhaps one of the most crucial thing is to decide when we have to start. And the second thing I would say in the plan is your communication protocol. As I told you, we were using a mass SMS platform along with social media, but this is for the first 1 or 2 hours. And if there is no response, you should be ready with posters, and then you should be ready to broadcast this through TV and whatever channel we have. And yesterday I was reading in Spain, they have started using ATMs to distribute this information. In US, we know there is an Amber Alert. So this communication plan is also a very important component of this. And we have to identify collaboration as a part of the response. And for police formations across the world, I think they are a little shy on collaborating with others. That is not the case, at least in this case, because the public, there is a lot of goodwill for children. And the amount of resources they have in the search process is immense. We shouldn't underestimate that. Then there should be a pointed effort to make collaborations with those agencies, the transport departments, railway department, where in my personal experience, they are the one who will be coming readily with the information in a very high number of cases. In India, the Railway Protection Force, they are doing an extremely good job in that. Then perhaps the last point I would like to mention is that if you have a good study on the situation of missing children in your region, you can perhaps get more leads into your investigation, so that in the last 5 years, if you have 10,000 cases, and out of 10,000 cases, the 6,000 cases, the children have actually gone on their own. And out of the children actually gone on their own, they have moved in this particular direction using this particular conveyance. That is definitely going to help you in the rescue efforts. So the importance of keeping data and analyzing that cannot be overemphasized. I would re-emphasize the point that in the whole human trafficking scenario, if there is a proper response whenever the child is reported missing, especially during the first hour, especially during the first half a day, I am sure that many kids will be saved from human trafficking. Because we all know once they are there out on their own volition, or somebody has taken them wooing or physically, the chances of rescuing them become very bleak as the time passes. Thank you. Thank you all.
Northwell Health Human Trafficking Heart Program International Symposium is organized in partnership with the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Global Strategic Operatives by the Order of Malta, and the United Nations GSO, the University of Madras, Sathyabama University, International Justice Mission, and Thriving Women Network. I am proud to be a part of the organizing team representing the University of Madras. Before I start making my presentation, it's my duty to thank respected Dr. P.M. Nair, former Director General of Police, and Dr. Santosh for their kind invitation to me to speak for a few minutes on this important occasion. So there's a slight change in the title of my presentation. It is Human Trafficking, not a criminological perspective as printed on the brochure. It is Human Trafficking, a victimological perspective. By and large, individuals who are trafficked are not considered as victims of crime. There is a need for us to understand the issue of human trafficking from the point of view of victims. Given the complexity and peculiarity of the process of human trafficking, the victims of human trafficking have some unique needs. Such needs should be understood not only from the perspective of victims or from the point of view of victims, but also in the light of certain established international standards. So therefore, this presentation of mine will focus on the following issues. I would just like to take a few minutes to talk about the existing legislations, and would like to give the existing statistics published by the Government of India, and a magnitude of the problem, and then process of human trafficking, and a few points on the UN Declaration of Basic Principles of Justice for Victims of Crime and Abuse of Power, and the needs of victims of human trafficking, and identifying the needs of victims of human trafficking. So that would be the focus of my presentation. So these are the main sections under the Indian Penal Code, the basic criminal law in India. Namely, there are 5 sections, sections 370, 371, 372, 373, and 374. These are the basic sections in the Indian Penal Code to deal with certain forms of trafficking. Besides the provisions in the Indian Penal Code, there are a host of special laws, including the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act of 1956, Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, commonly called as POCSO Act of 2012, Prohibition of Child Marriage Act of 2006, Bonded Labour System Abolition Act of 1976, Child Labour Prohibition and Regulation Act of 1996, Transplantation of Human Organs Act of 1994, the Punjab Prevention of Human Smuggling Act of 2012, and of course, we don't have any comprehensive legislation to deal with human trafficking as such. Of course, in the year 2018, a bill was prepared and placed in the Parliament, the Trafficking of Persons Prevention, Protection, Rehabilitation Bill of 2018. So these are about the existing legal provisions. I would like to provide some basic statistics. I have taken these statistics from the volume, namely Crime in India, published by the Government of India through National Crime Records Bureau during the years 2017, 2018, and 2019. If you just take 2019, the total number of cases of human trafficking reported was 2,260. And the number of victims trafficked was 6,616. And the number of victims rescued was 6,574. So always when you take the cases reported and the number of victims trafficked and rescued, you will find a kind of difference. The sense like of the 2,260 cases, the number of victims involved was 6,616. And this 6,571 cases of the victim, it's based on the victims, there's a number of persons rescued. And normally what happens, like after they are rescued, based on the inputs given by the victims, this classification is made. That classification is that what are the various purposes of human trafficking. That includes forced labor, sexual exploitation of prostitution, other forms of sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, forced marriage, petty crimes, child pornography, begging, drug peddling, removal of organs, other reasons. Of the total number of victims, 6,571, 2,080 of them were trafficked for the purpose of sexual exploitation. Again, for the purpose of prostitution. That is almost nearly, it comes to 31.65% of the total number of victims were trafficked for sexual exploitation for the purpose of prostitution. And this again gives you some basic information about the current plight of the victims or the cases. In the year 2019, of the total number of cases reported, that is 2,260 cases. The number of cases charge sheeted was 1,606. And the final report was included 312. And the charge sheeting rate is calculated normally based on the cases charge sheeted divided by the cases charge sheeted plus final report. That comes to 83.7% of the cases resulted in charge sheeting. With respect to the court disposal of the cases, in the year 2019, again, for example, the cases in which trials were completed, total number of cases was 782. Of this very important point to be underlined here or to be kept in mind. Out of the total 782 cases in which trials were completed, the number of cases that resulted in conviction was only 172. The remaining 538 cases resulted in acquittal. The cases acquitted, discharged by the court, was disproportionate to the number of cases convicted. So in other words, the conviction rate is 22%, year 2019. We should also keep in mind the official statistics always, particularly in the countries like India, does not necessarily represent the actual picture. Many times the cases of trafficking are not reported as victims themselves are not conscious of the fact that they are exploited or they were trafficked. So there are a myriad of legislations to combat human trafficking. It would be in the best interest of the victims if there's one comprehensive legislation to deal with human trafficking exclusively. I would like to throw light on the process of human trafficking, particularly based on experience, based on the data collected from the homes where these victims have been housed, and we interviewed them based on their inputs. Our understanding about the process of human trafficking is like this. Normally, the traffickers prey on vulnerable individuals from socially and economically deprived backgrounds, mostly from the rural areas or from urban areas where they are socially and economically backward. The individuals are then trafficked to various destinations by using better education or job prospects and enhanced living standards as allurements, false promises. Such individuals are exploited in multiple ways at various stages for commercial purposes as well as to gain control over them. Also, such individuals are exploited, and their exploitation is different dimensions of exploitation, including physical dimension. Mentally, they were exploited. Sexually, they are also exploited from the time they are taken away from their hometowns or native villages till the time they get some employment or some work, till the time they find some source of income. So they may get some income through odd jobs or services, or sometime, for example, generally the case with individuals trafficked for sexual exploitation. Ultimately, they end up in prostitution. Many of them start with smaller sexual favors or services and then eventually get involved in full-blown commercial sex work, and some also end up in vigilance homes under prostitution. And that's what we are focused on. Victims end up being misidentified as violators of law. In this context, it is also worthwhile to refer one of the important documents we consider as the Magna Carta for the victims of crime and abuse of power across the globe, the United Nations Declaration of Basic Principles of Justice for Victims of Crime and Abuse of Power, that provides the following sets of rights for victims of crimes. Number one, access to justice and fair treatment, restitution, compensation, and assistance, various forms of assistance, including emotional support. When it comes in that light, in the light of the UN Declaration, the light of the various sets of rights, so right to be recognized them as victims. So firstly, they have to be recognized as victims of trafficking. And that would bring a change in the approach of law enforcement and policymakers, particularly people who are trafficked for the purpose of prostitution. Very often they are misidentified as law violators and victims, as I told before. So therefore, initially they have to be recognized as victims of trafficking, and that would bring a change in the approach of law enforcement and policymakers towards the victims of human trafficking. Only if the individuals are recognized as victims of human trafficking or victims of some form of crime can they access victim services, especially the ones prescribed by the state, like victim compensation. We have some provisions in the Code of Criminal Procedure to get compensation. Like any other victims of crime, they might be in need of immediate medical and other forms of support. In the long run, they will require strong emotional support to overcome the trauma. So identifying the victims or victims of human trafficking, they will have certain unique needs, both short-term and long-term, including shelter. Shelter must be one of the important needs. The security and protection from the perpetrators or the people who exploited them before, and some form of monetary compensation and overall rehabilitation, including physical, psychosocial, and economic, financial, and various forms of rehabilitation. And ultimately, restitution is also possible in the case of victims of human trafficking. We should therefore strive to meet the standards prescribed in the various international instruments while ensuring the above victim services. Let us move towards a world devoid of exploitation. And this symposium is one such a great initiative by the various organizations, including The credit obviously goes to Northwell Health Human Trafficking Heart Program, and this is one step at a time is a very appropriate phrase I would like to use. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Srinivasan, for helping us to have some practical steps on how we can move towards a world without exploitation. And you've helped us to take that step, so thank you for that. And thank you, Dr. Ilyas, for your presentation earlier. We are so appreciative of the work that you are doing on the ground, and look forward to just working together more as we continue with these endeavors. Just want to encourage everybody, if you have some questions for our speakers, go ahead and just jump in the chat, and you can ask away. That's what this is about. I know this is not an in-person conference the way we had wanted it, but we're doing the best we can, and I think we're doing a good job. We have to kind of adapt and pivot with the times, and considering that we're doing this in a virtual environment, we want to engage and interact with you as much as we can. So jump in the chat, ask some questions. Just to let you know also, at the end of the symposium, you'll have an opportunity to interact with some organizations. We'll be dropping their links in the chat as well. So that way you can kind of like go to a table at the end of a conference and ask some more questions one-on-one. So stay tuned, we have a lot more coming.
Good evening. It is my honor to introduce Dr. P.M. Nair. Dr. Nair is an internationally acclaimed and UN-recognized expert in human trafficking with over 40 years experience in more than 20 fields, which is something that nobody in India has had. And his expertise spans 4 decades in many fields, including law enforcement, justice delivery, national research, both for the NHRC and for the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. He has trained stakeholders who have been and has been the key resource person for more than 1,000 trainings, both in India and abroad. He has worked with the UN on trafficking and has developed training modules of international standards. And he has worked with the World Bank to study the issue of trafficking. He has also worked with ADB doing study trafficking. He has adopted innovative methods in rehab and in prevention. He has also worked on lawmaking and drafting for the UN. He has drafted the trafficking bill for the government of India in 2016 as personally requested by the Union Minister. And he has also passionately mobilized youth against trafficking. And he has set up the AHTUs. He set up the first 9 AHTUs in the country in 2007. And this has been replicated by 400 governments. Developing institutional mechanisms of nodal officers in all states. He has networked with different stakeholders, including government, UN, corporates, NGO academies, research agencies, trans-border agencies, and he has facilitated rights-based trans-border transfer of rescued victims. He has also set up these AHTCs in colleges to involve the youth against trafficking. And he has integrated issues of missing children with the issue of trafficking in India and in the region. Sir has undertaken the capacity building of police, prosecutors, and judiciary as a mission to fight trafficking. And as of 2020, he has trained more than 62,000 stakeholders and has made a huge difference in their output. And Sir began with the rescue of 113 children from bonded labor in 1982. And since then, he has rescued or facilitated the rescue of more than 50,000 persons. And for Dr. P.M. Nair, the mission against human trafficking continues even after retirement from the government, making a paradigm shift in India in preventing and combating human trafficking. It is an honor to hear from you, sir. Over to Dr. P.M. Nair.
Thank you, Ms. Preeti, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this session devoted to law enforcement, criminology on human trafficking, and the medical professionals, as well as law enforcement officials. Let me start with a broad brush on the general dimensions of human trafficking.
having worked in this field for the last 40 years and 35 years on law enforcement, it is no doubt that it is an organized crime. It's a trans-border crime. And in fact, I call it as a basket of crimes, because within trafficking, you have different types of crimes combined together. There is selling of human beings, there's buying of human beings, there's exploitation of rights, exploitation of dignity, and all sorts of crimes are there. So I call it a basket of crimes. And now another feature is that the source may be one place, transit may be one place, destination may be another place. You can cut across boundaries of nations, districts, countries, and so on. The traffickers are now abusing the internet. They are there abusing and misusing the internet. A deep penetration. We have seen COVID times, how the internet has gone, how deep they have penetrated. Let me give an example for that. A few months back, a study was done by an agency in Delhi, and they found in a span of 2 months' time, in 150 cities in India, 5 million Indians have gone to the net seeking child pornography. Imagine if all the 15,000, 20,000 cities are put together, what would be the number? Even this number itself mind-boggling, because if 100 cities, 5 lakh Indians were searching the internet for child pornography, what does it mean? Demand is very high. Supply is very high. Child is being exploited somewhere. People are making huge money out of this. And it's an organized linkage everywhere. So demand, supply. We have to root out this demand issue. If you want to contain human trafficking, to control the demand, we need to have law enforcement. Therefore, among the response systems, law enforcement becomes very important. I am not denying for a moment that other activities are not important. In fact, if you ask me, the best methodology would be prevention plus protection plus prosecution. Prevention is naturally the best. For prevention, you have to work in the source areas, remove the vulnerabilities, and work in the demand area to address the demand. If both can be done simultaneously, prevention is good. Then comes the protection part. A rescued person shall be rehabilitated. A rescued person has to be counseled. A rescued person's capacity and understanding has to be recognized. The rights violation, the dignity violation has to be accepted, validated. And thereupon, we have to give life skills so that person can survive and flourish and move on. Of course, the lost dignity and rights can never be supplemented or never be supplanted, but something can be done. That something makes a lot of difference. Therefore, prevention, along with prevention, protection is also equally important. Now, one more dimension is protection. If the person is not properly rehabilitated, that person is still susceptible to re-trafficking. Therefore, if you want to prevent the re-trafficking, we need to do careful protection, careful rehabilitation. Both are interlinked. Then comes the most important, actually the third dimension is protection. It starts from the very beginning, identifying the indicators of trafficking, identifying the people involved, the entire network, the entire nexus, and building up evidence to collect evidence and bring them to court of law, provide them with stringent punishment and aggressive law enforcement. Unless this is not done, the human trafficking cannot be combined. From that perspective, if you ask the scenario across the world, no place can be an exception for this. Every place is either part of the system, either part of the source or a transit or a destination. All are equally responsible. So I can say that no place in the world is free of human trafficking. Any type of human trafficking could be for sexual exploitation, could be for exploitative labor, could be for organ trade, could be for slavery, could be for servitude, could be for any type of exploitation. And these days, the different types of exploitation are coming in a different facade, the camouflage. So it may look like a normal vocation, but it's a trafficking. Migration. Nothing wrong in people migrating. They have a right to migrate. But trafficking under the umbrella of migration, that's a problem. Escort services. Nothing wrong in having escort services. But trafficking under the facade of escort services, there lies a problem. So we need to understand that point. And from that perspective, all of us have to work together and combine this prevention, protection, prosecution area, work together. Medical fraternity has an important role in that. Their job comes not only in the protection part, counseling, medical care, psychosocial care, that's all known. But they have a very, very important role in prevention and prosecution too. You may ask how. If the doctor's report comes out to the truth, doctor's report presents the harm to the victim, the court of law will appreciate that point and give more punishment. So doctors, medical doctors, psychosocial doctors, psychologists, they have a large role to play in the examination of the victim. Their report is relayed upon the court as an expert witness. So that expert witness is very important. Then the counseling by the doctor, the psychological counseling by the doctor makes a tremendous impact. In fact, that's very important for not only facilitating rehabilitation, but also in understanding the trauma of the victim, and thereupon giving the appropriate orientation and counseling and skilling and empowerment of the person. So here lies the role of the medical professionals in a large way. Ladies and gentlemen, let me speak for 2 minutes on the islands of excellence. We have outstanding examples in the country. We have tremendous good practices, very large number of good practices which made a tremendous impact in not only in the country and the region. Let me start with a few of them. One is the anti-human trafficking unit. To start with, we did a research. In fact, the first point I would say is a research. I don't know any other country where research has been done in a comprehensive manner on human trafficking. We did a comprehensive research across India in 2004, 2002, 2004, 2 years time. And that research brought out the entire dimensions and also cleared the concepts, demystified the myth, and also exposed the vagaries and problems in the enforcement. That was an eye-opener. That made a tremendous impact. Number two, UNODC came in to implement the findings of the research. Very interesting. Research, then implementation. I was privileged to be part of the research as the principal researcher with the National Human Rights Commission. And I was also privileged to be the project coordinator for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Again, a 2-year project. We did in 5 states in India. India is a big country with 28 states, and among them, 5 states are taken for this project implementation on a pilot mode, and we did that. That made a huge impact. One of the activities is the anti-human trafficking unit, bringing the police together with the prosecutors and the civil society. Convergence was the mantra. Make them live together, make them train together, deliver together, work together, and that made a huge impact. We set up 9 anti-human trafficking units in the country. Today, after evaluation and seeing the impact, Government of India has replicated anti-human trafficking units to all the 720 districts in the country. What a great achievement. Now, along with that, we train the police officers and prosecutors and caregivers and NGOs. Okay, training on what? It's actually capacity building. Capacity building has got knowledge plus skills plus sensitization, attitudinal orientation, and resources. All these 4 elements are given due importance, and that made a tremendous impact. Sensitizing a person is very important, but telling the person how to do that attitudinal orientation and also the skilling part, that is what we did. That made a tremendous impact. Today, in those 5 states in the country, the impact is phenomenal. Ladies and gentlemen, another interesting part, interesting good practice is that we have linked up the NGOs with the government and the corporates The corporates have social responsibility, and they are brought into the activities of protection and rehabilitation. Then the harm assessment to the victim by the medical professionals and psychosocial professionals and psychologists is a very important thing which we did. I don't think many countries are having that facility. Today, we have a Supreme Court order in which they have decided that harm to the victim is very important in deciding the punishment to the accused, the person who is convicted, and also to the compensation to the victim. Monetary compensation and other compensation. So therefore, this harm assessment to the victim has come to stay as a very important part. Ladies and gentlemen, from that perspective, I can go on narrating many good practices in the country, but let me conclude here saying that we can share all the good practice across the country. This conference is a very important medium where let's share good practices here and there, work together, identify what we can do. We can bring out a common SOP on minimum standards of care. That's something which is very much wanting in the entire region. There are minimum standard of care on prosecution, minimum standard of care on protection, minimum standard of care, minimum standards required and prevention. So let this conference think about bringing out say an SOP, standard operating procedure on these things. And number two, we can bring out a compendium of the good practices. I spoke of 3 or 4. There are much more. Outstanding examples we have. Let's bring these good practices together and bring out as a compendium, which will be of use to all the fraternity across the world, across the country. If we work together, this can be stopped. But we need to work together. We need to bring together. I'm very happy that Northwell University and Indian Police Foundation and all of us have come together along with IJM and other important agencies today, and we are putting our heads together and hands together. Let's work together. If we work together, we can prevent trafficking. Our women are not for sale. Our children are not for sale. No human being is for sale. Let us spot it. Let us speak it. Let us act it, and let us stop it. Thank you. Namaste.
Hi, my name is Santosh Paulus. I'm a family medicine physician at Northwell Health, and I am the Senior Program Director for the Human Trafficking Heart Program. And I'm excited to have former Congressman Peter King and Diana Mao here with me this morning. And just want to give you a little background on both Congressman and on Diana. Diana is an abolitionist with a mission to eradicate human trafficking in her lifetime. Diana actively campaigns for change, and her visionary skill sets have urged NOMI Network forward into enormous growth and success. She was a 2015 Presidential Leadership Scholar and a New York Academy of Medicine Fellow. She co-chaired the Nexus Human Trafficking Modern Day Slavery Work Group from 2013 to 2019, and she served on the White House Public-Private Partnership Advisory Council to end human trafficking. Diana also writes for the Huffington Post and for Reuters and the United States Chamber of Commerce Business Civic Leadership Center. She's received several awards. In 2018, she was the Pioneer Award from Asian Americans for Equality, and she also received the 2018 Recent Alumni Impact Award from NYU, New York University. She received her bachelor's in business economics and Chinese from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and her master's in public administration with a specialization in international management from NYU Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. While in New York, Diana spends her time traveling to raise awareness and funds for NOMI Network, and she builds partnerships with industries and leaders in the private, public, and the government arenas to fight human trafficking. And also, we have former Congressman Peter King with us, who's served 14 terms in the United States House of Representatives from 1993 all the way till 2021. During his years in Congress, he served parts of Nassau and Suffolk counties. Pete King earned the reputation of being independent and always fighting for his constituents and the people of New York, even when it meant taking on his own party. Representative King was a leader in almost 2 decades long fight to obtain vital healthcare coverage and victims' compensation for all 9/11 first responders, which included firefighters, police, EMTs, and construction workers. For his efforts, Pete King was awarded New York City's highest civilian honor. Following Superstorm Sandy, Pete King led the fight against his own party to secure a $60.4 billion in emergency funding for storm funding for storm victims. Congressman King was also a leader in the battle against the brutal, murderous MS-13 gang, bringing the president and attorney general to Long Island to address the issue and to secure additional federal funding and resources, which dramatically turned the tide against MS-13. Representative King served on Homeland Security committees, on the committee from its founding in the aftermath of 9/11 until the end of his time in Congress. During that time, he ensured that New York and Long Island received the funding and technology needed as the #1 terrorist target in the U.S., including the Secure the Cities program to defend the city from a nuclear dirty bomb attack. In the field of healthcare, Pete King worked closely with New York hospitals and associations and strongly supported increased medical research addressing medical health issues such as breast, prostate cancer, childhood cancers, Alzheimer's disease, and diabetes. So Pete King is a lifelong New Yorker and graduate of St. Francis College here in Brooklyn and went to Notre Dame Law School. He and his wife, Rosemary, they live in Nassau County and have been here for more than 50 years. He has 2 adult children and 2 grandchildren. That was a long introduction for both of you, and I'm just excited to just get right into it. Congressman, I just wanted to start just by addressing, there's been just a bitter divide in politics and in Congress today. It's kind of gotten worse recently. What's the level of cooperation in combating human trafficking locally and internationally?
Well, thankfully, this is one issue where there is pretty much across the board cooperation. Congress, whether Democrat or Republican, liberal or conservative, members of Congress realize how hideous and terrible trafficking is, whether it's sex trafficking, labor trafficking, children soldiers, any of those issues, just absolutely disgraceful. And so there is, I guess, going back, it probably culminated back in 2000 when we passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which gives the State Department the mandate to report on sex trafficking, actually all trafficking in every country in the world. Now, the only possible downside to this is because it's so non-controversial, we really don't have any kind of lively debate. And to be honest with you, in the course of a year, this is something that's pretty much just done, and it's left to the State Department. Now, I know the Foreign Affairs Committee and others look into it, but it doesn't have the level of intensity that maybe it should. And one of the reasons for that is because there's across-the-board agreement. And again, the State Department has, as far as I can tell, done a very good job, whether it's under Republican or Democratic administrations. And also we try to highlight in some ways, like every February 1st is called Freedom Day. This is the day that the Congress passed the resolution for the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery in the United States. And that's a reminder to ourselves how any kind of slavery or trafficking or abuse of innocent humans is something we have to crack down on. So I'll just give one number on that. And last year, my understanding is that maybe 2 years ago, the latest numbers, there were almost 12 million people charged with sex trafficking or labor trafficking in the world. And I think about almost 10 million were convicted. But when you think of it, probably that's just a fraction of all the offenses that are being committed, because many countries don't take it that seriously. So for that many people to actually be charged indicate how high the number must be.
Wow. Yeah, that's just absolutely sad. Next question I wanted to ask Diana. You had a position as a senior consultant at an organization called Maximus, where they transform public policy into programs that change lives. Tell us about your career prior to your involvement in the anti-trafficking movement, and what made you want to switch career paths to become an abolitionist and start Know Me Network?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, while I was receiving my master's at NYU, I was given the opportunity to work for a microfinance bank in Cambodia. And so I traveled there the summer of 2007 and spent 10 weeks there. And it was there that I discovered the issue of human trafficking. I was charged with surveying 200 microfinance clients to make recommendations to this microfinance bank on how they can improve their portfolio and best serve these clients. And across the board, they were still making less than $1 a day. They had been living in squalid conditions and still were caught up in the vicious cycle. And the tip of iceberg was when a single father with 7 children offered my male colleague his youngest daughter in broken English. So at that moment, I knew that I needed to do something. And so I came back and started to volunteer my time in anti-trafficking, serving organizations, and one thing led to another, and the needs continued to grow. And that's when Know Me Network was birthed in 2009. At the time, I was still working in consulting, and it was more of a volunteer, real passion project that soon led to a full-time job in 2012, where we were funded by the State Department to replicate our workforce development model in India.
Wow, it's a great story of how you got involved. Thank you for what you're doing there. Congressman, can you tell me what steps the United States has taken with other nations in combating trafficking?
Yeah, probably the main thing we realize is this takes a worldwide comprehensive effort. So the United States, again, through the State Department primarily, cooperates with all UN protocols, with international organizations. We notify countries anywhere in the world when a known sex offender is leaving the United States for that country. I think last year, I get the numbers here. There was thousands. I can get the exact number here somewhere, but we sent out almost 3,700 notices to 127 countries telling them that known sex offenders were traveling to their country. We also realized, though, that there has to be, again, there's deployment protocols where countries required to offer medical and psychological assistance to victims. And what the State Department does, it evaluates every country in the world. And there's 3 different tiers, actually 4, or 3.5. There's Tier 1, which means countries are in compliance, which means that they do have strict laws they're observing. It means that they do have standards in place. Then there's Tier 2, where they come close but not close enough. Tier 2 on hold, where they are getting closer but not, again, they're sort of lagging behind Tier 2. And then Tier 3 are just countries that are in non-compliance. And we, at that stage, the United States has the option to cut off aid, non-humanitarian aid to countries that are not in compliance. That can be tricky at times because if you're cutting off, let's just say, how do you always define what non-humanitarian is, I guess is the point. And also in other countries where if we, for instance, those countries, if we continue to give them humanitarian aid, well, money is fungible. So they can, we take away that aid, then they use, we continue to give them the humanitarian aid, but then they just put that into military. So again, it's very tricky, it's complex, but the State Department is on it. And the President, the State, and Secretary of State have the option to waive the penalties. But again, it's something that it requires an all-out concerted effort. I think there has been real progress made. But also with COVID-19, in some ways, it's made it even more difficult. So we have other legislation, like the national defense legislation, that we can't be giving funding to companies who are involved in trafficking. We also make sure that this is at the forefront of the State Department's attention. But again, as I said, it's not something that's regularly debated in Congress. And I think we probably need more of that. Now, I'm sure you can find hearings and you can find speeches that are made on it. But there's nowhere near the level of intensity that other issues do. And maybe because these victims are in the shadows themselves, it's hard to find large numbers of sex trafficking victims because by the very nature of the crime, it's something that's done behind closed doors and it's in the shadows.
Mm. Kind of along those same lines, Diana, you were a President Leadership Scholar. You were a member of the White House Public-Private Partnership Advisory Council to End Human Trafficking. So how have these experiences kind of prepared you when you've had the opportunity to consult foreign governments and advise them on practices and economic models that you helped to shape at NOMI Network?
Yeah, I would say that, really the U.S. has a robust kind of continuum of care services for survivors of sex trafficking. I mean, as Congressman King mentioned, they're really a hidden population. And so being closest to clients has really helped NOMI to be able to really identify what the challenges are, the barriers to work specifically around reintegration for survivors. And so we had a focus group of survivors who we surveyed in New York City. And some women, they can't get to work because they can't afford a Metro card. Mm-hmm. And these real, just challenges are something that we, don't really think about. And so because we've been closest to the clients, we've really been able to take a very client-centric approach in making sure that their needs are not just met, but we move them from surviving to thriving. Mm-hmm. And so that, in countries like India, where frankly, there's not any shelter in sight. When we first started working in Bihar in partnership with the State Department, we, as a workforce development agency, we're the only service provider in that community. With a radius of 50 miles. And so people were coming to us with, really basic needs of just food and food security. And so with that, we realized that we had to really provide more services in which we were able to take what we learned in New York and in other places and build that network so that, perhaps when we cannot provide that service, we can map it out and really help create that continuum of care for survivors. So that really has translated into the private sector in India, working with companies, India's largest factory, that now we're working closely and co-creating an even larger continuum of services for survivors that are placed into their factories as well.
Mm. And as a follow-up, what do you feel is the greatest challenge that NOMI Network has faced, and how have you overcome that challenge?
Yeah, I would say, the biggest challenge that we faced in India has been really places that we work have poor rule of law, high corruption, mafia-ridden communities. And so with that, we face a lot of risks and threats locally that we've been able to overcome through building networks and building rapport with law enforcement, building rapport with local district magistrates. And I would say in the US, as we're getting ready to kick off our program in Dallas, with Dallas County Juvenile Detention System, serving girls 13 to 17, helping them secure internships and mentors. The challenge is really right now in the midst of COVID, internship opportunities and job opportunities are scarce to that matter. So that will be our challenge, is really how to get the girls safe and secure employment internships in the season of COVID.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Congressman King, you mentioned some things of how we interact internationally with other nations. Can you mention some of the measures that the United States has taken to put pressure on other nations on this issue?
Yeah, first, let me thank Diana for what she's doing and being a voice for the voiceless, really, because, again, this is almost the hardest community to find. There's not going to be parents coming out and advocating for them. There's not going to be neighbors. By the very nature of it, these are hidden people. So thank God there were people like Diana. And also it keeps Congress and the State Department alert. What the State Department does, every year it issues there's rankings, the tiers 1, 2, and 3. And if nothing else, that puts public pressure on countries, international pressure, also working with the UN and international bodies. We also, I think last year it was about $65 million, which is given out to countries that really want to work to combat trafficking, to put legal systems in place, to give them means of detection, also to provide the counseling and the health that's the healthcare that's needed for victims of this. And also, again, I would say probably the main thing is the State Department's annual report. We know it's just come out. I mentioned it before, but I've found that does have an impact on countries. They don't want to be listed as a tier 3 country, and if they're in tier 2, they want to get up to tier 1. Again, whether it's because of good intentions or just because they don't want to be shamed before the world. So I would say, as a moral leader, and also by us making it clear that we have no monopoly on morality here. I mean, obviously the cases in our own country are shameful. I guess the good thing is that law enforcement really at all levels is attempting to combat it, and we have the social programs in place for the victims. So it's going after the perpetrators and then providing assistance to these victims. And quite frankly, I don't know how anyone ever gets over this. I mean, I just, we look back on it, we had a bad experience in school when we were 12 years old. We carry that with us for the rest of our lives. Imagine if you've been sexually abused and trafficked and taken from country to country, or just hidden in the shadows and repeatedly abused, whether sex abuse or labor abuse. And also, like one other area, which I'll just add on this, I don't want to be monopolizing the time, but we found out that international peacekeepers, so you think are serving a good purpose, they were among the worst violators of trafficking. And so whether it's NATO, UNESCO, the UN, we've tried to make sure that the military, that these peacekeeping missions that go into other countries like this are not involved in trafficking.
Thank you, Congressman, for just being so honest, because part of the mission of this symposium is for us to challenge each other and to inspire each other, but we also need to be transparent and honest where our own shortcomings are. And you highlighted some of those where here in the US that we have our own shortcomings as well. Diana, would you be able to share with us a story of a survivor who has been impacted by NOMI Network?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many. I mean, these women really inspire me. And as we're getting ready to start our US program in Dallas, meeting girls already, I just hear their stories, and I'm excited for them going through our training program and, really looking at the long term into their careers. And for the women in India, I would say it's by far one of the worst places I've visited in terms of systemic violence against women, and also poverty, lack of infrastructure, women, living in huts without access to electricity or running water. We've been able to see great success. Women like Rima, who first joined NOMI Network, she was battered and beaten by her stepmother and forced into prostitution. And so eventually her stepmother left her and her siblings to fend for themselves as orphans. And she joined our program. She was able to get out of prostitution, joined our program, and currently has a job at India's largest exporter, Shahi Exports. And during COVID season, of course, a lot of factories shut down. She had to return back to her village. And during that period of lockdown, she had savings of up to 3 months, was able to provide for her family, and also received just respect, in essence, from the community, a community that typically doesn't value women. She was able to really gain respect and provide masks and PPE through our outreach program. We were able to reach 155,000 rural inhabitants in India, providing them with PPE as well as masks that were made by some of our graduates in our program.
Wow, thank you for sharing that, Diana. Congressman, I was going to ask you a question, but I decided to change it up just to keep you on your toes. I was wondering if you were to give Diana, she's started up NOMI Network, and it's come so far in this short amount of time. Kind of like, what kind of encouragement would you give her? What kind of advice would you give her, just based on your experience?
Well, first of all, I would encourage you to keep doing it. I would say that even though they're doing an outstanding job, to make sure it stays in the national debate, to reach out to members of Congress or the Senate the governors to let public officials know. And also, if they can find local people who have been affected, who are willing to speak publicly, to put a human face on this, rather than just think of somebody with their face shrouded somewhere in India or Bangladesh or whatever. If we can show these are real human beings, just like the kid down the corner, or just like, you know, the woman around the block. So that's what I would say, to try to publicize it. Not in a self-congratulatory way, even though they're much to be congratulated for, but to show that this is an issue that not enough people, including myself, and I was in Congress for many years before I realized the true extent of this issue. It's just something I think it really, that's why it wasn't until 2000 that the U.S. adopted the Victims Trafficking Protection Act, because, again, it's when I think it really hit us about how severe this issue was.
Thank you, Congressman, for those words, and thank you, Diana. You know, this is an issue that's local and global. You know, wherever, you know, there's a lot of organizations that are part of this symposium, and a lot of people that are listening all around the world. And this is an issue that's local for everybody. And so we do need to continue with this fight. And I thank you both for your commitment and just the efforts that you've been making, and will continue to make, and look forward to kind of partnering with you as we move forward. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Doug. And thank you, Diana, for what you're doing.
Thank you, Congressman.
Edward Victor Owens is the Deputy Special Agent in charge of Homeland Security Investigations, New York Field Office. In this executive-level position, he provides strategic and operational oversight over all investigative divisions within his purview. This includes the National Security Division, which incorporates 2 joint terrorism task force groups, extraterritorial threat resourcing, and counter-proliferation. He also leads 2 public safety divisions, which includes investigative groups that cover human trafficking, violent gangs, worksite enforcement, document and benefit fraud, organizational crime, drug enforcement, task force, and counterterrorism and criminal exploitation. Deputy Special Agent in Charge Owens also oversees Homeland Security Investigations, New York Intelligence Programs, which is administered by a Chief Intelligence Officer, and over 25 criminal analysts, which serve every investigative discipline within Homeland Security investigations, and leads the way on developing our strategic threat analysis for local and national resource allocation decision-making. Ladies and gentlemen, Deputy Special Agent in Charge, Edward V. Owens.
Hello, my name is Edward Owens. I'm a Deputy Special Agent in Charge with Homeland Security Investigations here in New York. For those of you who aren't familiar with HSI, we are the largest investigative arm for the Department of Homeland Security. HSI in particular, we investigate a myriad of domestic and international activities, anything that's crossing international borders that involve the movement of people or goods into or out of the United States. Here in New York in particular, one of the areas that I oversee as the Deputy Special Agent in Charge is our public safety, and within that, our human trafficking. That has been the most rewarding, if you will, area that I'm able to investigate. In particular here for New York, we look at, we have a 2-pronged approach of what we're doing in the human trafficking arena. On one hand, the investigative side, in that particular realm, we have done a phenomenal job at looking at large-scale, complex criminal investigations, identifying, dismantling, and disrupting those organizations that are supporting this, that are organizing this. But on that side, that's great. We've done a great job. But here's where things really come together. We also have our victim-centered approach. Our victim-centered approach really brings both the law enforcement and our professionals together to really look at what we can do to address the physical, the mental, and emotional needs of the victims that we encounter. By that, by that hand-in-hand walk, we're able to not only identify additional perpetrators, identify additional victims, but also look at how do we address the mental, emotional, the physical needs of the victim right now, today, tomorrow, and then how do we set them up in order for them not to fall back into that vicious cycle again. Overall, how do we continue to do this? We have what we call our 4 Ps on our counter-trafficking strategy. Our 4 Ps consist of preventing, protecting, prosecuting, and partnering. Preventing, I will touch on first. Our prevention model really gets into educating the public, putting ourselves out there, educating our practitioners, our partners, anyone and everyone who has an opportunity to see something and say something. Protecting, we're looking at, specifically in New York, we have our Human Trafficking Task Force. That Human Trafficking Task Force is composed of federal agents from HSI, partners from our federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, U.S. Attorney's Office, and District Attorney's Office. What does that bring to the table? We look at all the cases of human trafficking that we come across, and in that arena, in that task force setting, we're able to bring whatever prosecution is warranted, whether it's a federal prosecution or it's a state prosecution. And that 3rd P is our prosecution. And the 4th P goes for partnering. And that's what we're doing today, really trying to reach out and leverage all of our resources, leverage all the expertise that's out there, so that way we can move forward and really make a dent in the area of human trafficking. With us in particular, we look at labor trafficking, sex trafficking, organ trafficking, all of those things that fall under the realm of human trafficking. One of the things that I did want to talk about, an issue that comes up was sex work and prostitution, and how does that intersect with sex trafficking? The difference being that if it's not a minor, of course, sex work and prostitution by consenting adults, that doesn't fall under human trafficking. However, when you add that caveat of force, fraud, or coercion, or involuntary, anything that includes a minor, that's when we get into our sex trafficking. Why is this such a big business? Obviously, we talk about trafficking and we talk about smuggling. Human smuggling, voluntarily coming into the United States or voluntarily crossing borders. That is something that we look at. But when we look at trafficking, now we get into the involuntary. That's the crime against a person. Both of these areas are very lucrative. Both of these areas are illicit, and both of these areas involve organized criminal networks. One of the things in particular, though, why it makes it so appealing for the criminal organizations is where you can sell a kilo of cocaine and you can sell any type of illicit drug one time. For human trafficking, you can sell that victimized individual over and over and over again. And most of you know, traffickers and victims can be any age. There is no sort of cookie cutter platform or profile to see who may be a victim of human trafficking. I think in your work and our work, you've seen human trafficking victims and human traffickers come in all shapes and sizes. And then human trafficking in itself is also within legitimate and illegitimate industries. It can be anywhere from a hospitality industry, transportation industry, bars, strip clubs, massage parlors, construction. Any of these industries can be exploited to use labor that comes from human trafficking victims, or to use individuals that are subject to being trafficked. One particular area where we really need to try and move forward in and really address is that education, that outreach. The average age of entry into prostitution in the United States is 12 years old. That's an incredible number there. One of the things that we do as we go through our investigations and we go through the prosecution from a federal level, it takes a long time. Why does it take a long time? Because we really look at dismantling the organization. We really want to go after the people that are benefiting from this. And we also go after the people who are financing this. We are looking at the victims and their families to make sure that we provide them services today, tomorrow, and the next year. How can we help? As we log, I mentioned our human trafficking task force. All of you are part of our human trafficking task force. You know, there are three things that we can do that really helps us on this. Recognize, know the signs, know what's out there, know what to look for. And in these days, we have to adapt and evolve because the signs change. But by dialogue and by continued cooperation and collaboration, we're able to really, stay on top of exactly what we're working on. Report. Call us, call our tip line, and they'll have the numbers for our tip line at the end. We want you to report. Anything that you see, by all means, please reach out to us. And on that note, and that realm, we will respond. HSI will respond to your call. Like I mentioned previously, we have our task force that is composed of federal, state, and local counterparts. We will look at each situation and we will assess the situation to see where is the best prosecution for that. But the most important thing is we will respond. Together, we're going to be able to make a dent in human trafficking. Together, as we go forward, we're sharing information, we're sharing collaboration, we're looking at our initiatives, and we're really trying to dig deeper to be better partners, because only through this, only through working together, through collaborating, are we going to be able to really address the organizations, really address the victims. And if by enhancing what we do together, enhancing our conversation, we're able to save 5, 10, 100 more victims, then we've all succeeded. And that's what we call success. And like I mentioned, with our collaboration and with HSI Homeland Security Investigations, we are not only here in New York, we are nationwide, we are worldwide. Our human trafficking investigations transcend all of our state lines and international boundaries. We not only deal with domestic human trafficking, but we deal with international human trafficking. Victims that you identify or that are identified come from all walks, shapes, and areas of the world. We work collaboratively with our offices across the country and with our attaché offices internationally and our foreign government counterparts as well. We do this in an effort to really address not only the problem, but also address the victim's circumstances. One of the other things, specifically dealing with the federal government and international victims, I want to make sure that people understand when we identify you as a victim of human trafficking, immigration status is not an issue. We have legal remedies and legal means to take care of that. First and foremost, we want to put forward a partnership so that the way the victim understands when we come together as law enforcement, as practitioners, as forensic analysts, our victim awareness specialists, victim assistance specialists, these are all of the people that come together in a collaborative effort to really address our two-pronged approach at dealing with human trafficking. Again, working together, both internationally, domestic, across boundaries, across partners, across badges, together we will be able to make a difference. Thank you very much. And again, my name is Edward Owens. I'm the Deputy Special Agent in charge for Homeland Security Investigations in New York.
Greetings to everybody who have joined us here today. Welcome to the next segment of the symposium. Our speakers will be speaking on the medical, legal, and healthcare aspects of human trafficking. In this session, we are joined by Dr. R. Selvakumar, police surgeon and also the professor and head of the Department of Forensic Medicine of Government Kiripok Medical College, and Dr. S.P. Raj, assistant professor at MMM College of Health Sciences. As one of the most professors of forensic medicine in India, Dr. Selvakumar is a well-known face amongst the forensic medicine fraternity of India. It comes as no surprise that he is the recipient of the prestigious Best Doctor Award from the government of Tamil Nadu. Dr. Selvakumar has been teaching the law enforcement officers and judicial officers for almost 2 decades now. I request Dr. Selvakumar to take the floor.
Good evening, viewers from India, and good morning to my friends in US. Today, I am going to talk about human trafficking and forensics. Year 2010, when I was working in Madras Medical College in the Department of Forensic Medicine, police used to bring trafficked women who are sexually exploited for medical examination to our department. We used to receive 5 to 10 cases in a month. When we examine them, they are from other states of India. They don't know the local language. They don't know how to communicate. But we will examine and we will send them for medical treatment. We will screen them for sexually transmitted disease. We will hand over them to the police again. They will send them back to their respective families. They will help to reunite with the family after doing all these legal formalities. So when police brings these trafficked women to our department, we used to examine them and give whatever care is possible for medical care, for psychiatric counseling, and sexually transmitted diseases screening. If they require treatment, many women are found to be HIV positive, and they suffer from other sexually transmitted diseases also. So this is we have seen many cases in the past decade. So the human trafficking is happening for various reasons, for sexual exploitation, for labor, for child marriage. In India, child marriage is a problem. For that purpose, the women are trafficked. And lastly, for organ rape. Number one is sexual exploitation. So this is my experience as far as this human trafficking is concerned. I would like to highlight my forensic examination point in this session. In the GSO training, yesterday and today, the medical examination part has been handled by 2 experienced speakers. Yesterday, one of the speakers spoke about the entire medical examination part. Today, another doctor spoke about the psychological aspects of human trafficking, what happens to the victim during human trafficking. So today, I'm going to deal with human trafficking and forensics. How do forensic examination helps in proving human trafficking and bringing the perpetrators for the trial in the courts of law. There was one break. PPT எப்படி change பண்ணுவீங்க? Hello.
சார் சாரி சார், எனக்கு கேக்குதுங்க சார். நான் ஒன்றும் இல்லைங்க சார். நெக்ஸ்ட் ஸ்லைட் அப்படி ஒரு வார்த்தை சொன்னீங்கன்னா சேஞ்ச் பண்றேன் சார்.
அப்படிங்களா? ஓகே. நெக்ஸ்ட் ஸ்லைட் ப்ளீஸ் அப்படின்னு சொல்லிட்டுங்களா?
ஆமாங்க சார். அப்படின்னா நான் வந்து உடனே மாத்திடுவேன் சார்.
ஓகேங்க. அப்ப ஒண்ணுக்கு போலாங்களா?
ஓகே சார்.
Or I will start from the beginning. I'll go to the slide 1.
ஓகே சார். இங்க இருந்தா நீங்க வந்து இதுக்கு அப்புறம் சார் நீங்க முடிச்சிட்டு நெக்ஸ்ட் ஸ்லைட் ப்ளீஸ் அப்படினீங்களா நான் மாத்திடுவேன்.
ஓகே. Okay. I'll start.
Sure sir, start sir.
Yeah. My topic today is about forensic medical examination. Usually, while assessing the victims of human trafficking, assessment is done: medical assessment, psychiatric assessment, and psychological assessment. The speakers of yesterday and today in the GSO training spoke about the medical and psychological and psychiatric assessments examination point. Today I'm going to deal with forensic medical examination, which is part and parcel of the medical assessment. Next slide, please. So as far as human trafficking victims are concerned, there is no standard protocol which is followed all over the world. There are some models available for certain countries, but not yet a definite protocol has been formed during the examination of the victims of human trafficking, because each case scenario differs so much. That is the reason we are not able to bring a standard protocol. Next slide, please. So before examining any victim of the human trafficking, we have to get a valid, informed consent. Without consent, we are not supposed to proceed with the medical examination. Next slide, please. So the patients or the victims should be given freedom of choice regarding the gender of the forensic medical examiner. So they may not like, if the woman has to be examined, they may not like a male doctor examining them. So the choice or the freedom should be given to the victims in deciding who has to examine them. Then about the evidence part, evidence gathering must be sensitive to children and victims. So children may not know what is the medical examination part. So we have to explain to them in such a way they understand. So we should be aware of the needs of the children and victims of various cases. Next slide, please. Medical examination. In forensic medical examination, the victim or the patient has to be examined from head to toe. All the areas of the body has to be examined and looked for any change, injuries, violence, old scars, like that. Each area has to be mentioned. It is better to draw a diagram while examination. You want to mention anything. Next slide, please. Complete examination is necessary. So while we have to, when you are looking at the injuries, pattern of injury has to be marked. This is where a forensic medical examination differs from a general medical examination. A forensic person is an experienced person in deciding or in identifying the pattern of injury, what is the object producing, whether it is a weapon or caused by hands, or a belt-like material is used, or any wooden log or a weapon is used, or ordinary kitchen utensils are used. So the pattern of injury, from the pattern of injury, a forensic person will be able to decide what is the weapon causing such injuries. Next slide, please. So this can be divided into three different types. Usually, blunt force is used. Blunt force in the sense it can be a stone, it can be a wooden log, it can be a stick, or it can be any physical object which has got blunt surface. Or a sharp force may be used, pins may be used, a knife may be used, or any sharp object may be used for causing injury to the victims. Thermal injuries. Extremes of heat, a heated rod may be used on the skin for branding, for causing injuries. So this we can decide by the history given by the victim or by the eyewitness. The forensic person can definitely say whether these injuries are consistent or not consistent with the history given by the victim. This is how it is proved in the court of law. A forensic person goes and testifies in the court of law, and he can tell from the pattern of injury what is the probable weapon, whether it is a blunt force or a sharp force or a heated object. So he can testify in the court in a better way because he gets so much of information from the assessment of injury. He can describe the injury better, assess the injury better, document the injury better. Next slide, please. So some of the examples for The pattern of injuries, slap marks from the hands or digits. A person may slap the victim. So that has got a separate imprint on the face. Looped or flat contusions from belts or belt-like material is used. Contusions from fingertip pressure. The fingertips are used to hold the person with his arm or anywhere to restrain a person. That impression is made, which causes contusion. And parallel contusions from linear objects. This is the commonest thing we see in police custody. A police beats a person with lathi, not necessarily police, anybody. When the trafficked victim may be beaten by a wooden log or a plastic pipe or a iron rod, hit over the muscular areas of the body will cause two parallel lines that we call tramline contusions. So the pattern of injury can be known. Object causing can be known. Contusions from heels and soles because of the impression pressed against that surface, which causes contusion. Next slide, please. This is the tramline contusion. A person hit with a wooden log or a plastic pipe or an iron rod, this type of contusions are produced. So by looking at the pattern of the injury, we can come to a conclusion about the causating agent, the object or the weapon which causes this type of injuries. Next slide, please. This is a blunt injury over the face, over the forehead, or directly to the eye, or to the base of the skull. This type of black eye is a very common injury. If any assault over the face, the black eye is caused. Next, the very common injury. Next slide, please. So we have to look for, during examination, we have to look for the bruising over the inner aspect of the lip or inside the oral cavity, both lips, around the nose. Common areas due to fisting or slapping or applying pressure over the nose and the mouth. Next slide, please. These are all the restraint marks I was talking to you about. A person, if it is held tightly over the arm, pressing the fingers, it will cause small bruising. That is restraint marks, which says he was held in that position very tightly. Next slide, please. This is slapping or fisting over the lip, mouth, lip laceration, bleeding over the lips, or bruising over the lips. Any blunt trauma over the face because the teeth is below, so it is the lip is crushed between the teeth and the fist. Next slide, please. This has to be identified. So a person with knowledge of injury will be able to tell whether the injury is fresh or recent or old. If you see the scars and say it is old. You will see signs of healing and he will say it is recent. If he has got bleeding or swelling, if it is painful, he says it is fresh injury. So a forensic examination will be able, we are able to arrive at the age of the injury, when it could have been caused. Next slide, please. Pattern, I told you, fingernail marks. If the nails are used to scratch a person, nail scratch abrasions are noted. Bite marks, if a person bites, all these are seen in the victims. Child abuse, trafficking, sexual exploitation. Imprints of carpet or fabric. A person is pressed over the rough carpet. The imprint is seen over the face. Ligature mark around the wrist or neck. They may use a rope-like material and wound around the wrist or the neck, like a ligature mark, which constrict that part. All these can be seen in the victim's body. Next slide, please. These are all the examples for nail marks. If they are held with the hands in the neck area, this type of irregular crescentric abrasions are noted. We commonly come across this type of nail abrasions. Next slide, please. Bite marks, commonly seen in sexual torture, sexual exploitation. A person body, in the victim's body, you may see the bite marks over the face, over the breast area, or the inner aspect of thigh, or the abdomen, or the hands. All these areas commonly see bite marks. This should be photographed and measured properly and documented properly, will help in the court of law. Next slide, please. These are old bite marks, multiple bite marks over the body. Old, that even if it is old, that will give us age of the injury, and we will be able to correlate with the what has happened, how long before it has happened. Next slide, please. Branding. Victims of trafficking. The perpetrators use this type of sign languages, tattooing, or this type of marks to identify, for their identification. They will put this type of marks in the body. Next slide, please. Thermal injuries. Heated objects are kept over the surface of the body, either in the hands or feet or thighs or back, anywhere. Heated objects. Flat iron burns, curling iron burns, splash burns. Heated liquids are thrown on the face of the victims or over the body. Splashing of heated liquids, maybe hot water, it may be any other liquid. Immersion burns. The person's hands or legs may be dipped in the hot water or any boiling liquid. Next slide, please. So when a person is comes to know that the victim is sexually exploited, they have to look for genital injuries. They have to look for anal injuries, homosexuality. Then evidence of recent abortion. All these has to be noted, documented, of course, with after getting the informed consent. These areas has to be examined thoroughly and evidence has to be collected. It has to be documented properly about the color. Is there any bleeding? Is there any swelling? Is there any less tear? In these areas has to be noted, especially anal area, which is likely to be missed in general examination. Next slide, please. Other medical conditions may be seen along with these bodily injuries, maybe malnutrition, vitamin deficiency. They may be kept in detention centers. Inhuman treatment is given to them. Slave-like condition. Their clothing may be shabby. They may be dirty. No personal hygiene. All these will prove they're kept in like a slavery condition, inhuman condition. In a detention center, one shed, some 10-20 people will stay in particular place, lodged there. They cannot escape. So all this has to be corroborated. Next slide, please. Third is a sample collection. This is an indispensable component of victim examination. When a victim of human trafficking is examined in forensics, we collect the blood, urine, hair samples, and swabs from the orifices, natural orifices, especially genital orifices. So these samples will help us to know whether they are under the influence of any alcohol or any substance of abuse or any addiction forming agents. This we can find out at the time of examination. If you could collect these samples properly, use proper preservatives and preserve it properly, package it properly and send it to the respective forensic labs with the chain of custody. So only then we can prove whether they are addicted or fed with these substances of abuse. Next slide, please. Fourth is, most of the children may be trafficked. So how do we know they are less than 18 years? Only by assessing age. So forensic person is the right person to assess the age. How does he assess the age? By doing body measurements, by noting then their secondary sexual characters, sexual maturity, X-ray of joints and bones to know whether the bones are ossified or not. Then dental examination, which collectively gives a roughly exact age can be found out whether they are children or adults. Next slide, please. So how does forensic medical examination help us? It improves the quality of gathered evidence. We standardize the output. The data are compared with other parts of the world. Understanding the health hazards related to trafficking in human beings. Because of no understanding, we fail in rescuing the victims. So if we have understanding, we can easily identify, rescue, and put them back into normal life. Preventive measures and strategies can be planned. More efficient and less traumatizing for the victim. If a forensic examination is done, he will do it in such a way, in a professional way, without harming the victim. Next slide, please. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I thank the organizers, Dr. Santosh and his team, and the Indian team is headed by the former DGP, Dr. Nair, and criminology professor, Dr. Srinivasan sir, and Dilshad madam, everyone. And I would like to share, if I have permitted to share, when I was working in Madras Medical College, we used to receive trafficked women they are trafficked for sexual exploitation. They land up in Chennai, and if the police raid some hotels and lodges, they will catch hold of these women and they will bring for medical examination to Madras Medical College Hospital in the forensic department. We used to examine them. We used to screen them for all these things, sexually transmitted diseases and other types of medical illnesses. We send them for psychiatric counseling. Then police will take them back and they will send them back to their native place. That they will unite them with the family. Of course, the touts, the perpetrators, we don't know what happens to them. The conviction rate is low because the evidences are less. And even though doctors treat them, collect evidences, but when it goes to the court of law, standing in the court of law, we need a lot of evidence, especially medical evidence, and that should be properly documented. So I roughly told a gist about how the forensic medical examination helps to prove the case in the court of law. Thank you again. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I deem it a privilege to introduce Dr. Shekhar P. Sheshadri, sir. And it is something like where I'm feeling very honored really to introduce her. Dr. Shekhar is a child psychiatrist with over 35 years of experience in the field of child mental health. As senior professor of child and adolescent psychiatry and associate dean of behavioral sciences, NIMHANS, his work extends beyond the clinical population to children and child care institutions and, of course, to the service providers across the country as well as the South Asia region. Some of his special areas of interest in child mental health are childhood trauma, gender and sexuality issues, and life skill education. Also, an artist and musician, he uses a number of creative methodologies in child mental health interventions, including theater and developmental approaches. In the field, or in that belief that wider psychological interventions are rooted in child rights, in addition to his preventive, promotive, and curative child mental health interventions, he has undertaken various legal and policy-related initiatives. All his policy and practice work finds its way into training and capacity building programs for target audiences, ranging from students of mental health disciplines and mental health care professionals in clinical settings to child care service providers in non-clinical settings, including community health workers, teachers, government and non-government staff, and counselors and judicial personnel. I wholeheartedly welcome you, sir, to the session. Thank you.
Good evening, friends. Thank you very much for the honor of this invitation. In the Northwell Health Human Trafficking Heart Program International Symposium, which is organized the partnership between the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the Global Strategic Operatives by the Order of the Malta, and the UN GSO, the Sathyabama Institute of Science and Technology, the International Justice Mission, the Thriving Women Network, and the University of Madras. My presentation today, friends, will be on mental health aspects of human trafficking, but with a focus on children. Let's examine first the impact on the child survivor. Very quickly about the physical effects. On the one hand, wounds caused by physical abuse, a sexually transmitted disease, including HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and those abused for long periods of time or have been victims of trafficking from a young age, who have shorter than average height, they are underweight, and they are slow in both physical and intellectual development. But these have significant impact on the mental health as well. Let's look at psychological effects. Post-traumatic stress disorder, characterized by intense feelings of anxiety, fear, isolation, recurrent images of the trauma, excessive vigilance, giving rise to feelings of distress that can often culminate in self-inflicted harm and suicidal behaviors on the one hand, and on the other hand, many of these children may also appear to be hostile and aggressive and angry. And then there's high-risk behaviors concerning sexuality and substance use, low self-esteem and self-doubt, feelings of guilt and lack of trust. Now look at the spectrum of the psychological effects that trafficking has on a survivor. Let's examine now the social effects. Separation and alienation from family members, antisocial behaviors, the inability to fit with peer groups, relationship dynamics and tensions, and worries about reintegration with society. Now, the key elements where mental health is concerned in interviewing a child victim rests really on how does a service provider actually introduce himself and his or her role to the child victim. One must be clear on explaining to the child who you are and what your role will be. Because please remember that children who are often trafficked by family members and known people, thus their inability to trust new persons. One of the first responses as far as mental health is concerned is to validate the difficult experiences and emotions. Allow the child the time and the space to provide narratives on his or her experiences and feelings and respond with empathy on how difficult it must have been. Particularly when children have lack of agency and are disempowered, hostile and angry responses are natural and understandable considering the traumatic experiences that they have undergone. If you remember how much the child has been through, you need to be judgmental about your responses. Sexualized behaviors are also consequences of the process of abuse. So do not blame the child or judge her for such behaviors. All inquiry must be embedded in these techniques of interviewing. Therefore, to ask open-ended questions, allowing for the child's story to emerge, will get you more information and details. Close-ended questions need to be asked only for specific details. Never coerce or hurry a child to speak. Here is a very critical issue and a framework for intervention. Now, what happens in conventional responses to trafficking is the raid, rescue, repatriation, reintegration, rehabilitation, and redressal paradigm. So for kids who have been trafficked, the system raids the place of child labor or sex work. The child is rescued, repatriated perhaps to an interim shelter. An attempt is made to reintegrate the child to the family, if available and if willing. Rehabilitation, vocational training, placement, education, and redressal in the form of state compensations and financial compensations. But these 6 R's miss a very critical R, and that is reclamation. Reclamation of personhood and reclamation of affirmative sexuality for those children who have been trafficked for sex work. Imagine a child who has been rescued after 8 months of having been engaged in sex work, having seen 300, 400, 600 clients with their pants down. Is the response of a service provider such that the right of this child for affirmative sexuality and the right to a future legitimate adult intimate partner relationship by choice is something that you work on? Having said this, let's look very quickly at what are some of the mental health interventions and responses that are necessary. First, to look at crisis and preliminary interventions. Now, a crisis may occur at the initial stage of rescue, while separating the child survivor from the abusive situation and the threatening environment. But crisis may equally occur during the assessment process, when both the child survivor and members of his or her family are subject to careful assessment. Now, the crisis intervention is aimed at minimizing the kind of pressures that come to play to make them feel more physically, emotionally, and socially secure, and help them gradually regain some sense of control of the situation, a sense of agency and a sense of mastery, which they have hitherto lacked in the whole trafficking situation. Now, crisis intervention involves immediate physical treatment for injuries, diseases. This, of course, calls for medical professionals, but it also means psychological treatment to respond to post-traumatic symptoms, deviant behaviors, suspicions and paranoia, sudden outbursts of emotions and self-destructive tendencies by a psychiatrist or mental health professional, and social support by providing a caring and understanding person or family who can render moral and emotional support to the child survivor during assessment and rehabilitation processes. From here, you proceed to basic rehabilitation activities, which may be conducted by social workers, staff of non-governmental agencies, and non-mental health professionals. These include fostering healthy relationships, activities to establish positive relations between the child survivor, his peer group, and the staff, opportunities to participate in sports, recreational games, entertainment with other children, which means reclamation of what is their childhood and a reclamation of personhood and identity, which I had alluded to. Building confidence and trust involves activities aimed at making the child feel secure, allowing the survivor to feel confidence in herself while learning to trust others, for the survivor to know that he or she is not isolated. There is someone to talk to, someone to relate to, someone to even share secrets with. And every child wants this. And counseling to help regain a sense of self-respect and self-esteem. Then you prepare the child for repatriation. You assess the circumstances of the trafficking. Who trafficked the child? How? Was the family involved? Assessing whether it's safe to repatriate a child to the family, especially if there's the risk for the child being re-trafficked. Ensuring restoration of the child's agency. What is the child's decision in repatriation or placement? In the case of institutions, allow the child to visit the institution and judge suitability. If it is a family repatriation, build rapport between the child and the family through telephone conversations, home visits, or visits of the family to the facility before final repatriation actually takes place. And if a child is being repatriated, preparation of the child on how to respond to questions regarding her absence. Now, the child does not need to go into absolute details, but a child needs to know, how do I tell a person that I was trafficked for sex work? To say that there were some limitations due to, and for job purposes that I had to go, the circumstances were not suitable, I did not like it, and I had to come back, which is the truth. So how do you prepare a child to respond to these kind of questions that perhaps well-meaning people may put to them, but a child feels pressurized and guilty and shameful? The focus then on healing and recovery towards reclamation involves therapy for extreme trauma and PTSD, helping a child work through difficult feelings, making sense of the abuse experiences, moving from confusion to clarity, and reclaiming identity and selfhood. Counseling on sexualization, which means learning about personal safety, life skills education on happy, healthy, and safe sexual behaviors, and a reclamation of affirmative sexual identity. And addressing other high-risk behaviors and issues of conduct, which include coping and stress management, emotional regulation, relaxation techniques, and life skills education and training on substance use, conflict resolution, and decision-making. We have prepared this module for dissemination to all service providers who work directly with children in the context of trafficking, so that the sensitivities that are required for this kind of training are developed in these service providers. I would be happy now to address any questions that you may have of me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Sheshadiri, for those words. Your voice is actually very pleasant to listen to. And so if you want to hear these full interviews, they will be on our website after the symposium is over, and you can hear each of these pieces in full length. So make sure you guys check back and share the word with your colleagues and friends who would be interested in learning more about these anti-trafficking efforts. Soon you will be hearing, right next, you'll be hearing from Mr. J.K. Tripathi, who will have a pre-record of his video right now. And then followed by that, you'll hear an introduction from Dr. Greenbaum. And then we'll go right into our panel after that.
Human trafficking has been declared as an organized crime by the United Nations in the year 2000. It is indeed a borderless crime. The traffickers are well networked and are well organized. Therefore, any effort to address human trafficking must be done by all of us in an organized manner. We in India have professional expertise in addressing organized crimes, as is evident from the criminal justice system of the country. In fact, we have robust laws and expert law enforcement officers as well as prosecutors who handle the issues in the best manner. As regards human trafficking, we have a constitutional mandate to prevent. Further, there are substantive laws and special legislations too. We also have amendments to the legal regime as and when required. As head of the 131,595 strong police force in the state of Tamil Nadu, and with 1,843 police stations across the state, I can say that we have a talented team of officers working against every type of human exploitation. Human trafficking is indeed one of the gravest exploitations, and therefore it is in our priority agenda too. We have 43 anti-human trafficking units, one per district in the state. There are convergent task force of police and civil society working together in preventing and combating trafficking. I understand that Dr. P.M. Nair started 9 anti-human trafficking units way back in the year 2007, and now the Government of India has replicated to all districts across the country. We also undertake professional trainings for the law enforcement personnel. This makes a huge difference in their output. We associate experts, including medical professionals, in this task. Medical fraternity has to do a lot in the response mechanism. Hence, we have systems in place, not only for medical consultations, but also for psychological care of the victim. As the task is huge, it is imperative that the civil society, particularly the youth, join the mission and make great impact. Their involvement will make a huge difference. I'm happy to note that the colleges are setting up the anti-human trafficking clubs and are working towards the mission to end human slavery. I am sure our fight will get strengthened with such collaborative events and symposiums where we share good practices and learn from each other. This will help all of us across the globe to take the best efforts to contain this menace. My best wishes. Thank you.
I think two of the biggest issues are poverty and gender bias and discrimination. If people are in desperate need just to survive, they're going to be put in situations that are very high risk. And women and girls, because of the way they're objectified and treated as sort of second-class citizens around the world in multiple cultures, that renders them extremely vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. More and more people are traveling, so they can go to New Orleans or Bangkok or Mexico City. They can go anywhere and have sex with a child. I think also globalization is very challenging because now kids can be abused halfway across the world. You don't need to go to Bangkok to abuse somebody. You can do it online. You tend to think, well, some kids are so streetwise, they know everything. They're not going to be manipulated, but they're not. They're still 15, 16, 17, and it's very easy for a very savvy adult to run circles around them and manipulate them. It crosses all socioeconomic, racial, ethnic, cultural. Very much. Thank you so very much, and welcome to the panel discussion here. I am honored to be with three very, very wise and experienced persons from different areas of different professions, and I'd like to start by introducing people. First, we have Justice Sarita, who is a New York State Acting Supreme Court Justice, who is recognized as a leading judicial expert on human trafficking. She currently presides in a New York City criminal court over a drug court, a mental health court, and also the Queens County Human Trafficking Intervention Court, which I'm really looking forward to hearing more. This is a nationally and internationally recognized court for its groundbreaking work with trafficking survivors. The success of this court resulted in the United States' very first establishment of a comprehensive initiative involving a total of 12 courts throughout New York State, devoted solely to addressing human trafficking victims. And in fact, the Queens Human Trafficking Intervention Court was also the subject of a full-length documentary, which is wonderful as well. We have already been introduced to Deputy Owens. I just want to remind you that he is the Deputy Special Agent in charge of Homeland Security Investigations in the New York Field Office. And he has over 30 years of experience in law enforcement and currently provides strategic and operational oversight over investigation divisions, including national security, public safety, and intelligence. And then finally, we have Congressman Pete King, who served 14 terms in the United States House of Representatives from 1993 to 2021. And you've already gotten a great introduction on Congressman King. What I find especially interesting is his work on human trafficking and against the gang involvement in human trafficking. So we're very delighted to have these people here to answer some questions. And thank you all very, very much. Appreciate it. Justice Rita, may I start with you? Can I just ask you, how did the courts come to be involved in the fight against human trafficking?
Sure. First of all, I just want to thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me. And also, I appreciate the work, Dr. Greenbaum, that you've done as well. So it's really an honor to be here. I would say that in terms of the origins of the court in Queens, first, I just want to say that New York has been recognized as a national leader on the judicial front in addressing human trafficking. We started our court in 2004. Tomorrow, you're going to hear from Justice Fernando Camacho, who started the court in 2004. I took that court over in 2008. And basically, it stemmed from the realization that there was this gross contradiction between the arrest of individuals for prostitution charges and the fact that they were victims of human trafficking. But that was invisible for such a long time. And in part because nobody wanted to recognize that domestic victims existed, you know, American girls and women, most of whom were women of color. And so we attempted to essentially create a grassroots movement. It was a grassroots effort from the ground up without any resources, without any finances. And basically, we enlisted the participation of community service providers to develop a program that was an alternative to incarceration. So the purpose is really to provide holistic services, you know, for a broad range of people coming through our court system. We see hundreds of individuals every year, regardless of whether or not they are, in fact, victims of trafficking or, you know, exploited in the commercial sex trade.
And you see the types of people you see, are they children and adults, adolescents, adults?
Sure.
Boys, girls, everybody?
Many times we see young women who have been told by their traffickers to lie about their age, and so they should not be in criminal court to begin with. And the other thing is that we have seen many adult defendants in criminal court who were trafficked as children. And so because their trafficking status was never identified, they've been subject to many arrests over the years, and that's how they wind up in criminal court. And I would say that in terms of the domestic population that we serve, many of them are at risk because of vulnerabilities such as, you know, being in foster homes or being in very, very unstable family situations.
Yeah, I think that this is such an innovative, revolutionary idea, this court that provides a holistic approach or victim-centered approach, really looking at how can we help this person rather than how can we prosecute them. So I really think this is really innovative. And do you have some early successes that you might share? Just things that you think have worked really well?
Absolutely. I mean, I preside over these problem-solving courts, but I think the traditional model that we have in terms of drug treatment courts and mental health courts don't necessarily apply because trafficking is such a different animal. Right? And so, for example, recidivism might be a measure of success for these courts, but that is not the case in a trafficking intervention court, because if somebody is being trafficked, they might be arrested multiple times in multiple counties or cities. And in terms of successes, yeah, we have been able to have many of our participants leave their traffickers or find housing or, be able to leave the state because of the danger that they're in. In terms of the services that we provide, we connect them to a variety of services: drug treatment, mental health services, counseling, trauma-focused recovery, and we've had great success in that regard.
I think that's the way of the future, and I really appreciate all the work you've done sort of setting the trend for that. Deputy Owens, you've talked about the victim-centered approach, and I think Justice Sarita sort of emphasized that with her court. Can you give us some examples of the victim-centered approach as it applies to a child trafficking investigation? When law enforcement is working with the child, what do they do to make it child-centered?
Well, absolutely. I mean, historically, with HSI and a lot of agencies, we've been very proficient and very successful at prosecuting the individuals, the organizations that are specifically involved in human trafficking. However, what we're also looking at now, and I think what you see the larger push for us is really that investigative part is only one leg of it. We want to put people in jail, but even more so, we want to make sure that we're addressing the mental, the physical, the emotional needs of those victims. We brought in specifically our victim assistance specialists, right? That's a part of the whole the team, if you will. When they see the face of law enforcement, I also want them to see the face of people that are there to help them today, help them tomorrow, help them next month. So that's what we're looking at. We also brought in our forensic interview specialists. Many people have mentioned, interviewing victims is a little bit different of an animal than interviewing a typical criminal, right? It takes more of a finesse. So ideally, if we can get them into a safe space, then we can not only get them to help us identify other victims, but also help us identify the people that, victimized them in the first place. And we do that, that victim-centered approach is accomplished through partnering with all of our partners, all of our NGOs, all of our practitioners, and that synergy is what we use to really kind of now move that program forward, both domestically and internationally, right? Because that victim-centered approach, we have legal remedies where we can address some of the fourth order coercion that may happen. You may have a victim here who is afraid to talk because their family is still in another country. They're the only breadwinners for their siblings or what have you. So we have to really address it from a holistic standpoint, and that's where I think we're seeing a lot of our successes here.
That's wonderful. And I think you make up a really good point that the difference between talking to a child who's been victimized and exploited is so much different than interrogating a suspect. And so you really have to have some training in each. And so it's great that you have the forensic interviewer, but also all the other people who make contact with this child who are trauma-informed and trauma-trained as well is really important, because I agree it can be very traumatizing if care is not taken with the child. So that's excellent. Let's see. My next question is for Representative King. Can you give us some information about your thoughts on gaps in human trafficking advocacy in the United States and just abroad? What are we missing?
Well, first of all, tremendous progress has been made. Let me also endorse everything that Judge Reed and Mr. Owens have said. They've done a phenomenal job. The Queen's Courts have been a model for the country. And as I saw Mr. Owens before, the job that HSI has done in going after gangs, especially immigrant gangs, which terrorize the immigrant communities and all the evils that they have with them, is really done again, it's been phenomenal. As far as the gaps, again, we've come a long way. But I would say, as far as dealing with countries overseas, even a good number of them, unfortunately, are not in full compliance with what should be done as far as prosecution, as far as detection, as far as treatment, as far as providing counseling. And some of them, it's not just third world countries. There's others, even in Europe, who are not in full compliance. And again, that could be because either a cover up or they don't think it's a serious issue. They still haven't faced up to the fact about again, how real and dangerous this issue is. As far as here in the United States, again, I think we have come a long way as far as having the cooperation between the courts and social service agencies, and also the fact that the schools are more aware of this now. So I would say that the gaps are being closed, but again, this isn't an issue that's in the front burner of public opinion. It's not like drug addiction. It's not like let's say overt gang behavior. Something that still there's a shadow and a stigma attached to it. So I would say breaking down that stigma, breaking down the fact that no one wants it in their family, no one wants it in their school, no one wants it in their community, and when it is uncovered, they're afraid to talk about it. So I think it's a lot of it still is breaking down those those barriers as far as having people more willing to come forward and to make sure that the social services agencies, the youth services agencies are ready and are able to take it if the court does make, a referral.
I think you make such an excellent point about the need to increase awareness and to break down some of the cultural biases and beliefs that make it so stigmatizing for children or adult victims to come forward. That's a really important point. Back to you, Justice Sarita. I'm wondering, can you tell me a little bit more about, or tell the audience a little bit more about some of the challenges you faced in implementing this court and challenges you are working on now?
Sure. At the time we started the court about 16 years ago, obviously there was no recognition about the existence of trafficking survivors in the court system. So I think we've come a long way since then, and there's more widespread recognition of this reality. One of the things I've noticed during the years is that everybody who is involved with trafficking issues, whether or not law enforcement, government, service providers, et cetera, speaks the same language about applying a victim-centered approach. So that is really significant. And during these years, there's been a lot of changes and a lot of recognition. In terms of the challenges that we are facing moving forward, I think that they are certainly in the areas of identification, education, right? The need for collaboration and the need for expansion of services. I mean, these are definitely areas within the court system that we need to develop. One of the things that we have seen, for example, is that the New York City Police Department has no longer arrests individuals for prostitution or unlicensed massage, which is a positive thing because many of the victims that we see in our courts were arrested on these charges. But as a result, we now have to broaden our ability to identify those other individuals who are in the criminal courts and the criminal justice system. We know that these trafficking survivors and victims are there, right? So that's one challenge. Continued collaboration is absolutely key to all of our collective efforts in combating this issue. And similarly, in terms of expansion of services, figuring out ways to partner with other organizations and develop creative methods, whether or not it is a public partnership endeavor, right? And really thinking outside of the box in terms of how this can be accomplished. But getting back to the issue of identification for a second, I mean, now we have not only the courts, but government agencies, schools, right, hospitals, airlines, hotels that are raising awareness around this issue. And I think that that's very important. And that's really what we need to continue doing.
I think we're working hard in the healthcare sector to do our part in raising awareness and trying to identify people who are being exploited or at very high risk. But you're right, we all have to come together and know, what we can do and where to go and where to refer, and that can be very difficult.
And it's a phenomenal effort on the part of the healthcare system. Very, very by the symposium, for example. Yes.
Well, we got a long way to go. But okay, Deputy Owens, I'm wondering, can you share some of the biggest challenges your office faces in identifying child victims? We were just talking about with Justice Sarita about how hard it is. So tell us your views.
Absolutely. And then Justice Sarita brought up a very good point. We need to take that extra step to identify a victim. One, noticing and letting people educating the public, educating the different industries, right? Because human trafficking victims are out there in every industry, and it's not just in the massage parlors anymore. It can be anywhere. Educating the public to know what to look for, and then not to be afraid to come forward. And then once they do come forward, know that no matter where you come from, whether it's a domestic trafficking victim or an international trafficking victim, you have a safe space, right? You have, the arms of a whole host of people around you that are willing to take care of you and to really address the victimology. So that's the biggest challenge, getting the public's trust again, with so many things going on. And I can tell you, looking at it from a holistic, from a team effort, we're putting the face of law enforcement and as one. With our trafficking task force, we have both HSI, we have NYPD. Again, it's one face, right? So, getting the public educated on what to look for, different signs to look for, and being able to and feeling safe to really come forward. Those are some of our biggest challenges right now.
Thank you. I'd like to put this next question out to all three of you, and just, this is spontaneous. It seems to me that there's a lot of emphasis in the United States and in India and elsewhere on the need to have a victim-centered approach. So we've been talking about that. Lots of speakers have been talking about that. How do you all think that do you think that it's intercultural, that it is really sort of a universal approach? It's not unique to one culture or another, that this is something that should be globally addressed?
No, I mean, I can, from our standpoint, we look at it both domestically and internationally. I mean, historically, if you look back, when child exploitation and the international travel to have, engage in sex with children, as that ever evolved, we saw American citizens going overseas, and they had a false sense of security, right? They're doing these things as they're not in the United States, but we legislatively, we moved, and we had the traveling laws passed, and so now we can address those. Again, now with this, with trafficking, it's again an issue where we have to educate both our partners here and internationally, and we have to work together. That's the only way that we're going to really be able to address it.
Thank you.
I would say, again, maybe this is not entirely on point, but I think one issue we have here in the United States, at least I find, is within the immigrant communities, to getting them to cooperate, because again, you may have a number of them are undocumented and they're afraid to go to law enforcement because of that. You have others who may be documented but working off the books and afraid they're going to be deported. So it's that fear. And also, they come from countries where law enforcement is very oppressive. So you combine all of those factors, the fact they're undocumented, the fact that they may have a tricky economic situation, or they just come from a society where the police and law enforcement and the courts are corrupt and they're overbearing, and so they're afraid to cooperate. As far as countries overseas, I think the State Department report shows that many countries are in cooperation with these others. Obviously Thailand's an example, but I mean, there's so many others like that, where this is not looked upon as a major issue. it doesn't have the intensity, it doesn't have the cultural approbation that it should have. So I would say again, that's where the UN, I believe, can serve a role. The Palermo Protocol, which basically says that you have to provide, or you're urged to provide, social and medical and educational benefit to victims. I think that putting that on an international level, the Palermo Protocol, I think was very important. Now, how much is enforced? That's certainly still in doubt. But the fact that it's there, that the standard is set, that it's not just locking the person up, throwing the trafficker away, and then forgetting about the victim. It has to be an all-encompassing, holistic approach.
And then my question, Dr. Greenbaum, would be, if not a victim-centered approach, then what, right? Because in the courts, we came from looking at these victims, right, as criminal offenders, defendants deserving of punishment, to a shift in the paradigm, right, from defendant offenders, criminal offenders, to victims. Now the issue is, do we refer to them as victims, or do we, refer to them as survivors? I know that a lot of people object to the term trafficking victim. And so, I understand that to some degree. But I do think that in any effort to address trafficking issues, that we do need to apply a victim-centered approach. There's no other way in order to acknowledge the depth of victimization and exploitation that they have suffered.
I think that's an excellent point. And really, it's the only way to really respect basic human rights from the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's all about giving them voice and choice. And so I think you're right. A victim-centered approach is really the only way that really basically respects their rights and puts their needs at the top so that we can get them services. One of the things that I've noticed working with children is that in many cases, people who are subjected to trafficking don't see themselves as being exploited. They may not realize it. They may have a very different perspective, which is just as real as mine. But so they may not see themselves as being exploited. Have you, Justice Reese, found that as a difficulty in your courts, having to work with that?
Absolutely. And I think generally, first of all, nobody refers to themselves or thinks of themselves as trafficking victims. I think that point was made earlier in one of the presentations by Dr. Kalyani Gopal, and it is a point well taken, so that, for example, services are provided to everybody in our court, regardless of what they identify as, or whether or not there is any kind of identification made. And that is because it is so incredibly difficult for anybody, right, to get an individual to disclose their trafficking status for so many of the reasons that we are well aware of, right? Distrust of authority, governmental figures, et cetera. And so, for example, the involvement of service providers is absolutely critical. But I think that much of the terminology and the concepts that we use are not necessarily thought of, utilized, understood by the populations that we serve. And I see that profoundly with the Asian undocumented defendants who have come to my court. I would say at one point, maybe about 40% of the defendants were undocumented immigrant women. And in that instance, services that are very, very culturally sensitive and language specific are so essential to really working with this vulnerable population.
Just one more question, because I know the public wants to ask questions, but you brought this to my mind. Do you have suggestions on how to deal with cultural differences when they come to your court? How do you sort of make that connection?
Sure.
Give us advice.
Yeah, no, I think one is to, for service providers and other professionals to start becoming aware of what they know and what they don't know, being respectful of other people's cultures. But one of the biggest successes that we have had is working with an organization called Sanctuary for Families, and they had a team of case managers, service providers, and attorneys who all spoke Mandarin and who all had awareness of the cultural differences, and so they knew what phrases to use, how to approach an individual or client, right, about very, very sensitive topics, right, such as, working in the sex trade, whatever. And so that was able to really elicit, the people opening up, elicit, the responses that made sense, right, in that context. And so I know that we don't always have the ability or the resources, right, to have, let's say, providers or counselors with that kind of background. But I would suggest every effort be made to develop cultural sensitivity.
And I think that is extremely important and extremely difficult. There are so many nuances of body language and word use, as you mentioned, and beliefs and practices. I feel like it's very difficult to master, but essential. Mm-hmm. I could ask you forever these questions, but I'm going to open it up to the audience. If there are questions, please type them in, and we'd be glad to use the last couple of minutes to answer them. Okay. The first one is, Congressman, who would you say are partners still in Congress that are joining in this fight? Who are our allies in the U.S. government?
One person who's been a stalwart in this all along has been Congressman Chris Smith from New Jersey. He's really been, again, very, very active in this. And now the new chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee from Queens, Congressman Greg Meeks. He's very much aware of this, and the Foreign Affairs Committee is the one that has the most jurisdiction on this issue because they deal with the State Department. The State Department is the primary source here. So I would say Congressman Meeks is chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and Congressman Chris Smith, who has really devoted a career in Congress to this issue. And as I said, I think in the earlier presentation, this is an issue which is not really discussed enough, because there's not that much controversy about it. Mm-hmm. And generally whatever legislation is proposed is passed, which is good in one way, but also I think we lack that debate and that real intensity. And that's where Chris Smith has been phenomenal in just bringing case after case to our attention.
That's a very good point. It's interesting that if it is bipartisan, there's less attention paid in general. I just lost the question again. Could you bring it up? Yeah, thank you. The next question is, can the decriminalization and regulation of sex work make it easier or more difficult for human traffickers to take advantage of at-risk women? And that's for all of the speakers.
I don't think necessarily, because remember, the human traffickers, they're taking advantage of a vulnerable population. If you look at victims that are here from another country, they're here because they didn't really have a support network for a foundation. And so the traffickers are the only people that they know. And remember, the whole idea behind trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion. So whether it's a legalized industry or not, I mean, massage parlors are legalized, but they have victims there that are brought into the legalized industry, and then it's co-opted. So I think the additional fact of legalizing it doesn't necessarily make it go away. You will still have those people that prey upon the vulnerable, that prey upon people that are just trying to make ends meet, to find their next meal. So I think it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Thank you. Judge Rita or Congressman King, do you have any comments on that?
I would say, there's two sides to the coin. Obviously, I think traffickers can always try to take advantage of something. You got a well-intentioned policy or law, and traffickers will try to take advantage of it. But on the whole, I'm in agreement with the current steps forward.
Thank you.
I think Assemblywoman Liz Krueger recently submitted proposed legislation decriminalizing the offense of prostitution based on what is starting to be known as the equality model. But I do know that there are efforts underway in New York for full decriminalization, not only of the offense of prostitution, which are the charges that we see mostly in the Human Trafficking Intervention Court, but also charges involving consumers of sex, as well as brothel owners, et cetera. And so there is a raging debate that is occurring in New York at this point. But, from my standpoint, in terms of what I have experienced in the courts, I do believe that decriminalizing prostitution, the offense of prostitution, would go a long way in terms of mitigating the harm that, victims in the sex trade, have experienced.
Thank you. This next question is for Judge Sarita. Have you seen a rise in juvenile delinquency cases with direct impact of human trafficking? For example, runaways, AWOL, I guess absent without leave, females who may have become involved in sex work.
Mm-hmm. I do know that generally there's been an increase in sex trafficking during this pandemic. However, in terms of the actual numbers on the family court side, it is really hard to say because I'm not a family court judge. And so I really don't know what the experience has been there. Tomorrow, when Judge Camacho, Fernando Camacho, who started the court in Queens, speaks, he may have some more information on that.
Thank you. And the next question is for you as well. How many traffickers have been prosecuted successfully since the court's inception, and how can other states implement this innovative court?
So one of the features of the Trafficking Intervention Court is that we do not deal with sex trafficking prosecutions. We don't deal with traffickers. We only deal with those charged with the offense of prostitution and trafficking victims, right? Trafficking victims and those women who are exploited in the sex trade. As far as successful sex trafficking prosecutions, I think that New York, especially New York City, has done a very, very successful job because the DA's offices have developed human trafficking bureaus, which are, multidisciplinary teams on their side, working with social workers, et cetera, to successfully prosecute traffickers. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but they have been increasing over the years.
If I go back to a point that was made before on the again, I've been rethinking the whole thing on decriminalization of prostitution. I understand the motive behind it, but again, I think we have to realize is could that result immigrants in the neighborhoods like being overflowing with sex offenders, prostitutes. In other words, when all the barriers are taken down, well, that opened it up so much that it'll be very difficult even to find out where the sex trafficking is. I mean, often it's the prostitution laws which enable police to find out about the sex trafficking. So my concern is not from a moralistic point of view, but just from if you totally decriminalize it, how far that goes, what that actually entails, and could that involve just an inundation of sex workers into certain communities, particularly the lower income or minority communities and immigrant communities where people are most vulnerable. So that's the concern I would have. I realize the idea that you don't want to make people, you don't want to victimize the innocent or people who are been lured into it, but hasn't that been a way to find out where the sex trafficking is by use of the prostitution laws? So anyway, that's just a concern I have. And I know Senator Krueger has that legislation, but I hope it's really debated, because sometimes a bill like this, which has good motives, can be really exploited by the evil people in society.
Thank you very much.
Right. No, that's exactly it. And, looking at, we're taking that one part of it out, but we still have to address the people in the organizations that are going to exploit, any legitimate industry. you're still going to have those criminals that are exploiting those who can't help themselves. So that would be my concern as well.
Okay, I think we have time for at least one more question. And this was, I think, to everybody. Are there any specific resources for the migrant population victims of human trafficking? And this writer is asking particularly about New York City, but I would extend that beyond if you guys can comment on that.
You mean immigrant community?
Yeah. Yes.
I think the first thing is make sure that the immigrant community understands that there's a safe space here, right? Yeah. With our victim assistance specialists, and that's what they're focused on. One, making sure that all of the immigrant communities understand when you come to us, you do not have to fear being deported. You know, and once you make that initial inquiry, once you open that door, and then it takes us working with all of our partners at Sanctuary for Families, all of our NGOs, the resources are out there. And that's what our victim assistance specialists, they're responsible for really developing those relationships. And that's what we're trying to develop now, beforehand, proactively. So that way, there's so many different organizations out there. I think everyone is willing to help. It's just a matter of getting in touch with, if you get in touch with one, you get in touch with all of us, right? So we developed that network amongst ourselves. And so what I may not be able to provide, you know, internally or organically, I now have a contact so we can make sure that we get the victims whatever resources they need here, you know, locally. And that number is growing by the day. You know, so it's incumbent upon us to continue this communication and exactly what you're doing here. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with everything Deputy Owen said. It's important that they realize they're not going to be deported, they're not going to be expelled from school, they're not going to lose health benefits they may have, and that there is a means to get assistance. Also, I think, and I'm not the great liberal-minded person here, but I do know that we can't just say, for instance, if it's the Hispanic community, that all Hispanics are the same. Each group within that community has its own cultures. And I think it's important we have people who are able to deal with them, with the various cultures. And I'm sure Judge Sweet is much more expert on this, but not all Asians have the same culture. And I mean, I've heard that from people in the Hispanic community, how, again, there are different customs or traditions or fears that each immigrant group has, and we have to have a greater sensitivity to that. How that's done, it's easier said than done, but I think it's something we have to be aware of.
We only have about half a minute left. Do any of you three have any last parting remarks you'd like to make?
Let me just thank again, Northwell for doing this. This is so important. And having been in Congress and seen all the issues that we talk about, this one is not talked about enough, either in Congress or in the public eye. So I think this does so much to bring that out.
Absolutely. Awareness is key, right? That's the only way that we're going to be able to make, you know, a significant headway in this, you know, from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to the International Center. I mean, all of this, you know, working together in the healthcare industry. Thank you very much for putting this together.
I echo the same sentiments. I really do want to thank Dr. Santosh Paulus for helping to organize this, and to Northwell, and also for the collaboration that we are developing between the U.S. and India, especially, you know, around healthcare issues and trafficking. I think it is tremendous.
Thank you all very much for being panelists and teaching us all a lot. I've learned a tremendous amount in the last hour, so thank you so very much.
Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Edward Fraser. I'm the Vice President of Community Relations at Northwell Health. Thank you all for attending and participating in our International Human Trafficking Symposium, and a special thank you to all of our incredible speakers. The symposium and the impact we are making on our communities is a joint effort involving many key stakeholders. the United Nations through their global strategic operatives, and the International Center of Missing and Exploited Children. Human trafficking is a global conversation, and we are just in the beginning stages of it. Northwell's HARP program began in May 2017 with a task force consisting of dozens of Huntington Hospital employees. The program has trained more than 3,000 employees in how to identify, triage, and support victims of human trafficking. In addition to providing training and education to our employees, we have also worked with public schools, reaching both students and administrators. Our main priority for the program is for Northwell Health to be a medical safe haven for victims and survivors of human trafficking by providing them with care that starts with crisis intervention in the emergency department. We are excited to have already heard from our speakers who represent anti-trafficking efforts in healthcare, the judicial process, and legislative responses. Today, we have heard the toll of the trauma on these individuals and how this is a public health crisis that needs to be addressed now. Against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, the risks of child labor and forced labor have been elevated. COVID-19 makes already vulnerable individuals even more vulnerable to trafficking. COVID-19 has not slowed the traffickers down, but rather helped them utilize alternative methods to exploit the most vulnerable, as we've learned today. Thank you for taking the time to learn more on this issue and to see where you fit into both the local and global response. It is imperative that we all commit to raising awareness, and that awareness must lead to action. We all have a part to play in the battle against human trafficking. Please join us tomorrow as we continue to learn and gain inspiration from each other. Thank you again, and I hope you continue to enjoy the symposium.
All I can say is wow. Thank you, Dr. Greenbaum, for moderating that panel. Thank you, Judge Sarita. Thank you, Congressman Peter King, and also Edward Victor Owens. Thank you so much for just your insight, your challenges, and just helping us to learn from you and from the experiences that you have had. We talked about at the beginning that we just got to keep this conversation going, and human trafficking is a public health issue. And as a public health issue, it takes us as society collectively to make an impact. And right now you have an opportunity to join some breakout rooms. You know, we talked about how we had to pivot and make changes because of COVID. And so as this is a virtual symposium, usually you'd be able to walk out now and interact with the organizations and speakers who have just shared. And we want to give you that opportunity. So right now in the chat room, you're going to see some links for organizations. NOMI Network will be there, International Justice Mission will be there, Cycling for Change will be there, and you'll have a chance to interact with them. You know, right now, it probably felt like you just got a drink from a fire hydrant, and there's just so much coming at you. So this is a chance to digest a little bit more and interact with the organizations, hear a little bit more about what they're doing, and see how you can get involved. You know, we talk about the Blue Heart that the United Nations has put out as the Blue Heart campaign that represents the fight against human trafficking. That represents the coldness and hardness of those that are trafficking others. And it also represents the sadness that those that are being trafficked, that they feel. There's also a third aspect to that, and that's our hearts. What are we going to do collectively to make an impact to try to end this tragedy and this evil of human trafficking? So this is an opportunity for you to learn a little bit more and to get involved. And I'm also the founder and president of Cycling for Change, which is an organization, not-for-profit, where we cycled across the United States from Washington State back to Long Island. And the idea was to raise awareness and to raise funds to help fight human trafficking. So if you want to learn more about our efforts, which is a global effort, you can get involved. Our hashtag is #IHateTraffic, and I know each of you do as well. So check out the links there and join us again tomorrow, as we will learn a lot more and hear from a lot of amazing speakers tomorrow. Thank you, and we'll see you later today and tomorrow.